Hello everyone, I am. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel now, get comfortable and relax. The headlights appeared out of nowhere, twin beams cutting through the darkness behind me. I squinted at the rear view mirror, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. Where had this truck come from? The highway had been empty for miles. It was well past midnight and I was on the final stretch of a grueling CR cross-country drive. My eyelids felt like sandpaper and the endless ribbon of asphalt ahead blurred into a hypnotic streak. I'd been pushing myself to make it home before dawn, but now with this truck bearing down on me, I was wide awake. The cab loomed large in my mirror, impossibly close. I tapped my brakes, hoping the driver would take the hint and back off. No luck, if anything, it seemed to inch even closer. "Come on, just pass me already," I muttered. Easing over to the right lane, the truck matched my move perfectly, staying right on my tail. I could practically count the rivets on its grill. My heart started to race. This wasn't normal behavior. Even for the most impatient driver, I pressed down on the accelerator, watching the speedometer climb 70, 80 miles per hour. The truck kept pace effortlessly, never falling behind. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I was alone on a deserted highway with a truck that seemed determined to run me off the road. My mind raced through possible explanations, each more unsettling than the last. Road rage, a drunk driver, or something worse. I spotted a sign for an upcoming rest stop and made a split-second decision. I'd pull in there where there might be other people around, safety and numbers right. As I took the exit, the truck followed. I cursed under my breath, hands shaking as I navigated the dark, twisting road leading to the rest area. The parking lot came into view, illuminated by a single flickering street light. It was empty. I pulled into a spot near the restroom building, killing the engine. The truck's headlights flooded my rear view mirror, blinding me. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart pounding in my ears. This was it. Whatever was going to happen would happen now. Seconds ticked by, then silence. The light behind me vanished slowly. I opened my eyes and turned around. The parking lot was empty. No truck, no headlights, nothing but darkness and the faint buzz of the streetlight above. I sat there, frozen for what felt like hours. My mind struggled to process what had just happened. Had I imagined it all? Was I so exhausted that I'd hallucinated a threatening truck? Eventually, I gathered the courage to step out of my car. The cool night air hit my face. Helping to clear my head, I walked a lap around the parking lot, half expecting the truck to reappear at any moment, but there was no sign it had ever been there as the adrenaline began to fade. Exhaustion crept back in. I decided to try to get some sleep in my car before continuing my journey. I reclined the seat and closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I started to drift off, I'd jerk awake, certain I'd heard the rumble of an engine. The sky was just beginning to lighten when I gave up on sleep. I needed coffee if I was going to make it the rest of the way home. I started the car and pulled out of the rest stop, constantly checking my mirrors for any sign of the truck. The highway was still eerily empty as I merged back onto it. My nerves were shot, and every vehicle I saw in the distance made my heart rate spike, but none of them were the truck that had chased me. About an hour later, I spotted a 24-hour diner just off the highway. The parking lot was half full, a welcome sight after the emptiness of the night. I pulled in, desperate for caffeine and human contact. The bell above the door jingled as I entered. A few heads turned to look at me, then went back to their own conversations or plates of food. I slid into a booth near the window, still able to keep an eye on my car and the highway. Beyond, a waitress approached, coffee pot in hand. "Rough night?" she asked, eyeing my disheveled appearance as she filled my cup. I nodded. Wrapping my hands around the warm mug, you could say that had a bit of a scare on the highway. She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what happened?" I hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish. How could I explain what I'd experienced without sounding crazy? "There was this truck," I began. "It followed me for miles. Riding my bumper when I pulled over at a rest stop, it just vanished." Driving it. She shook her head. That's the thing, no one ever sees a driver and the truck always disappears without a trace. A chill ran down my spine. What do you think it means? The waitress shrugged, but her eyes were serious. I don't know, but there's been a string of robberies on that highway lately. Cars found abandoned, drivers missing. Police haven't been able to catch whoever's behind it. My mind reeled, trying to connect the dots. A phantom truck disappearing. Drivers, unsolved robberies. It was like something out of a nightmare. Has anyone reported this truck to the police? I asked. She nodded. A few have tried, but without any evidence and with the truck always vanishing. Well, let's just say the police aren't taking it too seriously. I sat back processing this information. Part of me felt relieved that I wasn't the only one who had experienced this, that I wasn't going crazy, but a larger part was terrified what was really going on out there on that lonely stretch of highway. The waitress must have seen the fear in my eyes. She reached out and patted my hand. Look, you made it here safe. That's what matters. My advice, stick to driving during the day if you can, and if you see that truck again, get somewhere public as fast as you can. I nodded, grateful for her kindness and the warning. As she stood to get back to work, a thought occurred to me. Wait, I called after her. You said there have been robberies, missing drivers, but I wasn't robbed. The truck didn't even stop when I pulled over. Why? She turned back, a grim expression on her face. Maybe you got lucky, or maybe they were just scouting, learning your habits, your reactions for next time. With that chilling thought, she walked away, leaving me alone with my cooling coffee and racing thoughts. I stayed at the diner far longer than I'd planned, nursing cup after cup of coffee as I watched the sunrise fully. The normalcy of the morning rush helped ground me, reminding me that the world wasn't all dark highways and phantom trucks. When I finally got back on the road, I felt more in control. The highway looked different in the daylight, less menacing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That somewhere out there, the driver of that ghost truck was waiting for another opportunity. I made it home without further incident, but the experience stayed with me. I found myself researching highway robberies in the area, looking for patterns or clues. I even considered reporting my experience to the police, but always stopped short. What could I tell them that wouldn't sound completely insane? Weeks passed, and slowly the intensity of that night began to fade. I still avoided driving that stretch of highway after dark, but the constant fear subsided. Life went on then. About a month after my encounter, I saw a news report that made my blood run cold. A car had been found abandoned on that same highway. The driver missing. Witnesses reported seeing a large truck in the area just before the disappearance. As I stared at the TV screen, a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't help but wonder, had I really escaped that night, or had I just postponed the inevitable? The highway stretched out before me, a dark ribbon cutting through the night. But now every set of headlights in my rearview mirror made me flinch. Every truck that passed sent my heart racing. The once peaceful solitude of a late-night drive had been shattered, replaced by a constant gnawing fear. I knew one thing for certain: I would never look at an empty highway the same way again, because now I knew that sometimes in the dead of night those highways aren't as empty as they seem, and the things that lurk in the darkness don't always disappear when you turn to face them. The shovel struck something hard, sending a jolt up my arms. I paused, wiping sweat from my brow with a muddy hand. We've been digging for hours, and the well was supposed to be nothing but dirt for at least another 10 feet. I called down to my son Jake, who was working beside me in the hole. Hey, grab the flashlight, will you? I think we hit something, little did I know. That metallic clang would be the sound that changed everything. I'd inherited this farm from my uncle 6 months ago. It was a fixer-upper, to put it mildly, but it was a chance for a fresh start. After the divorce, Jake and I had thrown ourselves into the work, fixing fences, repairing the barn, and now digging a new well. The old one had run dry years ago, and we needed water if we were going to make a go of this place. Jake shone the flashlight where my shovel had struck the beam, reflected off something smooth and metallic, a stark contrast to the dark earth surrounding it. What is that, Dad? Jake asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and apprehension. I shrugged, already scraping away more dirt with my hands. I don't know. Bud, let's find out. As we dug, the object began to take shape. It was a metal container about the size of a small suitcase. It looked old. The once shiny surface now pitted and corroded my mind, raced with possibilities. A time capsule, buried treasure, or just some farmer's junk tossed in a hole and forgotten. It took another hour of careful digging to free the container from the earth. By the time we hauled it out of the well, the sun was setting. Casting long shadows across the field, we carried our find back to the barn, both of us silent, lost in our own thoughts about what might be inside, under the harsh glare of the barn's floodlights. I examined the container more closely. It was sealed tight with no obvious way to open it. A faded inscription was barely visible on one inside, but years of corrosion had made it illegible. "Should we open it?" Jake asked, practically bouncing with excitement. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to call the police, or maybe a lawyer. What if this was evidence of something, but curiosity won out, all right. I said, reaching for a crowbar. "Stand back." It took some effort, but finally the lid creaked open. The smell hit us, first musty and stamped like an old cellar. Inside, protected by layers of waxy paper, was a stack of documents and photographs. I picked up the first photo, holding it under the light. It showed a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, and smiling at the camera. The picture was old, probably from the 1960s, judging by her hairstyle and clothes. I turned it over. On the back in faded ink was written, "Sarah Milligan, 1964. Jake peered over my shoulder. "Who's that, Dad?" I shook my head. I don't know, but as I said it, a nagging feeling started in the pit of my stomach. The name Milligan sounded familiar, but I couldn't place why. We spent the next hour going through the contents of the box. There were more photos, all of the same young woman, Sarah, at various locations around what looked like this very farm. There were also letters, newspaper clippings, and a small leather-bound journal. As I flipped through the journal, a yellowed newspaper clipping fell out. The headline made my blood run cold. "Local woman still missing after 3 months." I read the article quickly, my heart pounding. Sarah Milligan had disappeared from her family's farm in the summer of 1964. Despite an extensive search, no trace of her was ever found. The article mentioned that Sarah's father, the owner of the farm, was the primary suspect, but was never charged due to lack of evidence. "Dad," Jake's voice snapped me back to the present. "What's wrong?" I looked at my son, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jake, I think we just found evidence in a very old missing persons case." His eyes widened, really like a real mystery. I nodded, my mind racing. "Yeah, Bud, a real mystery." I started gathering up the documents, careful not to disturb them more than necessary. "We need to call the police." The next few hours were a blur. Deputies came out to the farm, followed by detectives and a crime scene unit. Our quiet little farmhouse became the center of a whirlwind of activity. Jake and I were questioned separately, telling and retelling how we'd found the box. It was past midnight when things finally calmed down. The box and its contents had been taken away as evidence, and we'd been told not to discuss the case with anyone, as if we knew anyone to discuss it with. We were still new in town, barely knew our neighbors. I tucked Jake into bed, his head full of excitement about our discovery. But sleep eluded me. I sat at the kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee in front of me, staring out at the darkened fields. What had happened to Sarah Milligan, and why did her name sound so familiar? The next morning I drove into town, determined to do some digging of my own. The local library was small, but it had archives of the town's newspaper going back decades. I spent hours poring over microfiche, reading everything I could about the Milligan case. Sarah had been 23 when she disappeared, engaged to be married. Her fiancé had reported her missing when she didn't show up for a date. The last person to see her was her father, James Milligan, who claimed she'd left the farm to run errands in town. As I read, pieces started falling into place. James Milligan, that was my uncle's name, the uncle who'd left me this farm with a growing sense of dread. I realized why Sarah's name had sounded familiar. My mother had mentioned her once. Years ago, a cousin who'd gone missing before I was born. I left the library in a daze. My mind realized, had my uncle been involved in Sarah's disappearance, had I inherited not just a farm, but a dark family secret? When I got home, there was a police car in the driveway. Detective Reeves. The lead investigator was waiting for me. "Mr. Collins," she said as I got out of my truck, "we need to talk." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd spent a sleepless night, Detective. "Reeves didn't waste time on pleasantries. We've identified the DNA on some of the items in the box." She set her eyes boring into mine. "It matches Sarah Milligan. We're treating this as a homicide investigation now." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Mr. Collins, I have to ask, did you know anything about this before you found that box?" I shook my head vehemently. "No, absolutely not. I inherited this farm from my uncle 6 months ago. I never even met him." She raised an eyebrow. "Your uncle?" I took a deep breath. "James Milligan, Sarah's father, Detective." Reeves leaned back. "Surprised you're related to the Milligans." I explained what I'd learned at the library about the connection I'd only just discovered as I talked. I could see the wheels turning in the detective's mind. "Mr. C, I'm going to be straight with you," she said. "When I finish this, complicates things. We're going to need to do a thorough search of the property, and I'm afraid you and your son might need to find somewhere else to stay for a while." I nodded, feeling numb. "Of course, whatever you need." The next few weeks were a nightmare. The farm became a crime scene with police and forensic teams combing every inch of the property. Jake and I moved into a motel in town, down watching from afar as our new home was torn apart in search of evidence. The story hit the local news, then went national. Suddenly, our quiet little town was overrun with reporters and true crime enthusiasts. Everyone wanted to know about the mysterious box, about Sarah Milligan, about the farmer who'd inherited a decades-old secret. I tried to shield Jake from the worst of it, but it was impossible to hide everything. He was old enough to understand the basics of what was happening, and his initial excitement about solving a mystery had given way to a more somber understanding of the reality we were facing. It was Jake who asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Dad, do you think Uncle James did it? Do you think he killed Sarah?" I pulled him close, wishing I had a better answer. "I don't know, buddy. I really don't know." As the investigation dragged on, more details emerged. Old case files were opened. Witnesses re-interviewed. The picture that emerged was a sad one. Sarah had wanted to leave the farm to start a life with her fiancé, James. Milligan had opposed the marriage, wanting Sarah to stay and help run the family business. But there was no smoking gun, no confession, just a lot of circumstantial evidence and a family torn apart by secrets and suspicion. Finally, after nearly 2 months, we were allowed to return to the farm. The police had found no other evidence, and while the investigation remained open, they had no reason to keep us from our home. The farm felt different now. Every creaking floorboard, every rustle in the field seemed to whisper of long-buried secrets. I found myself avoiding the spot where we'd found the box, as if Sarah's ghost might be lingering there as we settled back into our routines. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were living in the shadow of a tragedy. The farm that was supposed to be our fresh start now felt tainted, haunted by the echoes of the past. But we stayed partly because we had nowhere else to go, but also because it felt like we owed it to Sarah to uncover the truth, to bring her story to light. After so many years of silence, I don't know if we'll ever know exactly what happened to Sarah Milligan, but I do know that her story and the secrets of this farm are now a part of our lives, and somehow we'll find a way to live with that, to honor her memory while building our own future on this land every time I pick up a shovel. Now I can't help but wonder what other secrets might be buried beneath our feet, and are some things better left undiscovered. The first time I saw the blue sedan, I thought nothing of it. By the third time, my palms were sweating on the steering wheel. By the fifth, I was fighting the urge to scream. It had started as a fun road trip, a chance for Emily and me to reconnect. After a rough patch in our relationship, we'd planned a route from New York to California, mapping out quirky roadside attractions and scenic viewpoints along the way. But 3 days in our carefree adventure had turned into a waking nightmare. We'd stopped for gas just outside of Chicago when I first noticed the car. It was a nondescript blue sedan, probably a Toyota or Honda, with tinted windows that made it impossible to see the driver. As I filled up our tank, I saw it pull into the pump across from us. Nothing unusual about that, but then we stopped for lunch 2 hours later at a diner in the middle of nowhere, and there it was again. Parked a few spaces down, I nudged Emily, nodding towards the car. Is it just me, or did we see that same car at the gas station? She squinted, then shrugged. Maybe it's a pretty common car, though, probably just a coincidence. I tried to believe her, but a nagging feeling had taken root in my gut as we ate our burgers. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see someone watching us, but the car just sat there silent and empty. We hit the road again, and for a while I managed to relax. We sang along to our road trip playlist, played silly car games, and marveled at the changing landscape as we pushed west. But as the sun began to set and we pulled into a small town to find a motel for the night, my blood ran cold there in the parking lot. Of the only motel in town was the blue sedan. Mem, I said, my voice tight. Look, she followed my gaze, and I saw the moment realization dawned on her face. Face. Okay, that's a little weird. She admitted. We checked in quickly, hurrying to our room with our bags. I double-checked the lock on the door, then peered out through the curtains. The blue car was still there, its windows reflecting the neon glow of the motel sign. Should we call the police? Emily asked, her voice small. I hesitated. And tell them what that we've seen. The same car 3 times in one day, they'll think we're paranoid. We spent a restless night taking turns to keep watch. But nothing happened when morning came. The blue car was gone. I wanted to believe it was over, that maybe we really had just been paranoid, but as we merged onto the highway, my heart sank. There, a few cars behind us, was the familiar blue shape. We need to lose them. I said, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Emily nodded, her face pale. How I took the next exit abruptly. Earning a chorus of honks from other drivers, the blue car followed. I turned down side streets, randomly trying to be unpredictable. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of our pursuer in the rearview mirror, sometimes not, but they always reappeared after an hour of this cat and mouse game. We found ourselves on a lonely stretch of country road, fields of corn, stretched out on either side, broken only by the occasional farmhouse or barn. What do we do now? Emily asked, her voice shaking. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, I saw something that made my heart leap into my throat. Up ahead, an old barn loomed by the roadside, its faded red paint peeling in the sun, and parked behind it. Just visible was a blue sedan. They're waiting for us, I whispered. Emily's eyes widened in fear. Turn around now, I slammed on the brakes, ready to spin the car around, but it was too late. The blue sedan pulled out from behind the barn. Blocking the road ahead, at the same moment I saw another car appear in my rearview mirror, cutting off our retreat. We were trapped. Time seemed to slow down as the driver's door of the blue sedan opened. A figure stepped out and I felt the world tilt on its axis. No, Emily breathed beside me. It can't be, but it was walking towards our car. A grim smile on his face was Emily's ex-boyfriend, Mark. Memories flooded back, memories I'd tried to suppress. Emily showing up at my apartment 6 months ago, bruised and terrified. Her tearful confession about Mark's possessive behavior, his violent outbursts, the restraining order we'd helped her get, the weeks of looking over our shoulders, jumping at every sound. We thought it was over. We thought we were safe. Mark approached the driver's side window. I hit the lock button for all the good it would do. He leaned down, his face inches from the glass. Long time no see, he said, his voice muffled but still chilling. Did you really think you could just run away? Emily was frozen beside me, her face a mask of terror. I reached for her hand, squeezing it tight. What do you want, Mark? I called through the glass, trying to keep my voice steady. His smile widened, showing too many teeth. I want what's mine, he said. His eyes fixed on Emily. She's not yours, I spat. She never was. His face darkened. You don't know anything about us, about what we had. I know enough, I said. I know you're breaking the restraining order just by being here. He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. You think I care about some piece of paper you think that can keep me away from her? I felt Emily trembling beside me. I had to do something, had to get us out of this. But how? That's when I noticed something. The car behind us, the one that had been following us earlier, wasn't one I recognized, and the driver. The driver looked uncertain. A plan began to form in my mind. A desperate, possibly stupid plan, but it was all we had. Emily, I whispered, not taking my eyes off Mark. When I say go, I need you to duck down. Can you do that? She nodded, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. I took a deep breath. Then in one swift motion, I turned the key in the ignition and slammed the car into reverse. Go, I yelled. Emily ducked. I floored it. Our car shot backwards straight towards the vehicle behind us. At the last second, I saw the driver's eyes widen in panic. They swerved, just barely avoiding a collision. Mark shouted in anger, running towards us, but I was already shifting into drive, cutting the wheel hard. We fishtailed onto the shoulder, kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel for a heart-stopping moment. I thought we might have flipped, but then the tires caught and we shot forward. I didn't look back, I just drove, pushing our car to its limits. Emily sat up slowly, her face pale. Are they following us? I asked, not daring to take my eyes off the road. She turned in her seat, peering out the back window. I don't think so. I can't see them. I didn't slow down. We drove for hours, taking random turns, avoiding main roads. Every car we saw made us flinch every time we had to stop for gas. We scanned the area obsessively. It was well past midnight when we finally felt safe enough to stop. We found a small motel in a town we'd never heard of, paid cash for a room, and collapsed onto the bed, exhausted and shell-shocked. How did he find us? Emily whispered into the darkness. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. I don't know. Maybe he hacked your phone or something. We'll get new ones tomorrow. She was quiet for a long moment. I'm so sorry, she said. Finally, her voice breaking. This is all my fault. I've ruined everything. I turned to her, pulling her close. Hey, no, this is not your fault. None of this is your fault. It's all on him. She buried her face in my shoulder, her body shaking with silent sobs. I held her, my mind racing. What were we going to do now? We couldn't go home. Mark knew where we lived, where we worked. We couldn't continue our trip. He'd been able to follow us this far. Who knew how long he could keep it up? As the first light of dawn began to seep through the curtains, I made a decision. We're going to disappear, I said. Emily looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy. What do you mean? I mean, we're going to become different people, new names, new identities. We'll go somewhere he'd never think to look. It sounded crazy even as I said it, but what choice did we have? Emily was quiet for a long moment, then slowly she nodded. Okay, she said, let's do it. And so as the sun rose on a new day, we began planning our vanishing act. Our road trip had become an escape route leading us not to California, but to a new life entirely. I don't know if we'll ever truly be free of Mark. I don't know if we'll ever stop looking over our shoulders, but I do know this. We're in this together, and together we'll find a way to survive the open road stretches out before us, full of possibility and danger. In equal measure, we drive on into an uncertain future, leaving the past in our rearview mirror for now. At least we're free. The last time I saw Eliza Thompson, she was laughing. It's an image seared into my memory, her head thrown back, long dark hair catching the golden light of the sunset, the sound of her joy carried away by the sea breeze. I didn't know then that it would be the last time I'd ever see her, that in less than 12 hours she would vanish. Without a trace, leaving behind nothing but questions and a growing sense of dread that threatened to swallow us all. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. My name is Michael Chen, and I was a security officer aboard the Emerald Princess, a luxury cruise ship making its way through the Caribbean. It was my third year on the job, and I thought I'd seen it all: drunken brawls, petty theft, the occasional medical emergency. Nothing I couldn't handle, but Eliza's disappearance, that was something else entirely. It started like any other day at sea. I began my shift at 6 a.m., making my rounds through the ship's corridors and public areas. Everything was quiet, most passengers still asleep in their cabins. As I passed by the ship's grand atrium, I nodded to Eliza, who was just finishing up her night shift at the reception desk morning. Michael, she said, stifling a yawn. Anything exciting planned for today? I shrugged, just the usual. You should get some rest. You look beat? She laughed. Gathering her things, Oh, I will. But first I'm going to watch the sunrise from my favorite spot on the upper deck. Want to join me? I hesitated. I was on duty, but it was a quiet morning. Sure, why not? I could use some fresh air there. We made our way to a secluded spot on deck 16, leaning against the railing as the sky slowly lightened. Eliza closed her eyes, breathing in the salty air. I love this, she said softly. No matter how many cruises I work, this never gets old. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, struck by how peaceful she looked. We'd become friends over the past few months, sharing meals in the crew mess and swapping stories during our off hours, but in that moment I realized there was still so much I didn't know about her. How long have you been working on cruise ships? I asked. She opened her eyes, a wistful smile playing on her lips. 5 years now. It was supposed to be just a gap year thing after college Z, but I fell in love with it. The travel, the people, the sense of adventure. I nodded, understanding completely. It was why I'd stayed with this job too. Despite the long hours and time away from home, we chatted for a while longer as the sun crept above the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Finally, Eliza yawned again. I should really get some sleep. She said, thanks for the company, Michael. See you later. I nodded, watching as she walked away. It was the last time I would see her alive. The rest of my shift passed uneventfully. It wasn't until that evening during the nightly staff meeting that I realized something was wrong. Eliza wasn't there. Has anyone seen Thompson? Our supervisor? Rita asked. Frowning at her clipboard, she was supposed to start her shift an hour ago. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the room. It wasn't like Eliza to be late, let alone miss a shift entirely. I saw her this morning. I offered she was heading to her cabin to sleep after the night shift. Rita's frown deepened. Can you go check on her? Make sure she's all right. I nodded, an uneasy feeling settling in my stomach as I made my way to the crew quarters. I knocked on Eliza's door, calling her name. No response. I used my master key to enter, half expecting to find her sound asleep. The cabin was empty. The bed was made looking like it hadn't been slept in. Eliza's uniform for the evening shift was laid out neatly on a chair. Her phone was on the nightstand. It's screen dark, I radioed Rita. She's not here. The cabin looks untouched since this morning. There was a long pause before Rita responded. Initiate search protocol. Now the next few hours were a blur of activity. We combed every inch of the ship from the engine room to the uppermost decks. We reviewed security footage, interviewed crew members and passengers, but there was no sign of Eliza. The last confirmed sighting of her was on the security camera outside her cabin at 7:12 a.m. The footage showed her entering her room, closing the door behind her, and then nothing. No footage of her leaving, no sign of disturbance. It was as if she had simply vanished. Into thin air as the night wore on and our search turned up nothing. The atmosphere on the ship grew tense. Passengers began to notice the increased security presence. Whispering among themselves, rumors started to spread. By morning, we had to face facts. We had a missing person on our hands. The captain made an announcement asking for any information about Eliza's whereabouts. Her picture was displayed on screens throughout the ship. We contacted the nearest port authorities and the cruise line's head office. A Coast Guard search was initiated, though we all knew the chances of finding someone in and the vast expanse of the Caribbean were slim to none. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow responsible. If only I'd walked her to her cabin that morning. If only I'd checked on her sooner. The image of her laughing in the sunrise haunted me as the investigation ramped up. I found myself recounting every detail of my last interaction with Eliza to a stern-faced detective from the ship's security team. Did she seem nervous? Distracted? Did she mention any plans for the day? He asked. I shook my head no. She seemed happy, relaxed. She was looking forward to getting some sleep. The detective's eyes narrowed. And you're sure she went into her cabin? Yes, I said, for what felt like the 800th time. The security footage confirms it. He nodded, making a note in his file, and there's no way she could have left without being seen on camera. I hesitated. It shouldn't be possible. The corridor outside the crew cabins is monitored 24/7. But as I said it, a chill ran down my spine, because if it wasn't possible, then how had it happened? Days passed, and the mystery only deepened. Eliza's cabin was thoroughly searched, revealing nothing out of the ordinary. Her passport, wallet, and all personal belongings were accounted for. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of foul play. Theories abounded among the crew and passengers alike. Some believed she had somehow fallen overboard, though how she could have done so without anyone noticing was unclear. Others whispered about suicide, but those who knew Eliza dismissed this outright. She had been happy with no signs of depression or distress. The most disturbing theory, the one that kept me awake at night, was that someone on the ship was responsible for her disappearance. The thought that one of our passengers or crew members could be a killer, walking among us, was almost too horrifying to contemplate. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation hit dead end after dead end. The ship completed its scheduled cruise and returned to Pori, where more intensive forensic work could be done. But even with the full resources of law enforcement brought to bear, no new leads emerged. Eliza's family flew in their faces, drawn with worry and grief. I watched from a distance as they were briefed by the investigators, saw the mother collapse into sobs as the reality of the situation sunk in. I wanted to approach them to offer some words of comfort, but what could I possibly say? In the end, the Emerald Princess set sail again, with a new crew member taking Eliza's place at the reception desk. Life on board returned to normal, or a semblance of it, but for those of us who had known her, who had searched for her, who had been left behind with nothing but questions, things would never be the same. I stayed on with the cruise line, unable to leave, while Eliza's fate remained unknown. Each new port brought a flicker of hope that some clue would surface, that someone somewhere might have seen something. But as months passed, with no new information, that hope began to fade. Sometimes in the quiet hours of the night, I find myself on deck 16, staring out at the endless expanse of the sea. I think about Eliza, about her laugh, about the way she loved watching the sunrise. I wonder where she is, if she's still out there somewhere, and I can't help but feel that the ocean knows the truth, holding its secrets in its unfathomable depths. The disappearance of Eliza Thompson remains an unsolved mystery, a ghost story whispered among cruise ship crews for me. It's a constant reminder of how fragile our sense of security can be, how easily a life can vanish. Without a trace, and every time I see a passenger enter their cabin, every time I watch a security camera feed, I can't help but wonder. Could it happen again in this floating city of steel and glass, surrounded by the vast indifferent sea? Are any of us truly safe? The Emerald Princess sails on, carrying its cargo of vacationers and secrets, and somewhere out. There perhaps Eliza is still laughing her voice, carried away by the endless ocean breeze. The first slash in the tent canvas was so perfect, so surgical it almost looked deliberate. I traced my finger along the edge, feeling the fray nylon threads. Whatever had done this wasn't just sharp, it was wickedly so. And as the fading daylight filtered through that precise cut, casting long shadows across the abandoned campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stumbled into something far more sinister than a bear attack. My name's Alex, and I've been hiking the Appalachian Trail with my best friend Jamie AI for the past month. We're experienced backpackers used to the challenges of long-distance trekking, but nothing in our years of outdoor adventures could have prepared us for what we found in that secluded clearing deep in the heart of the Georgia wilderness. The day had started like any other on the trail. We'd broken camp at dawn, hoping to cover a good 15 miles before nightfall. The weather was perfect, cool and crisp, with just enough breeze to keep the bugs at bay. We'd made good time, pausing only for a quick lunch and the occasional water break. It was late afternoon when Jimmy spotted the first sign that something was off. "Hey, Alex," he called, pointing to a tree just off the trail. "Check this out." I walked over, squinting at the trunk. There, carved deep into the bark, was a crude symbol, a circle with a jagged line through it. The cuts looked fresh, the exposed wood still oozing sap. "Weird," I muttered. "Never seen a trail marker like that before." Jamie shrugged. "Probably just some kid messing around." We pressed on, but I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The forest seemed quieter than usual, the usual chorus of birdsong and insect buzz oddly muted, and I could have sworn I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, always just out of sight. When I turned to look as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, we started looking for a suitable campsite. That's when we saw the clearing. It was perfect, a small level area nestled between two rocky outcroppings with a babbling stream nearby, but as we approached we realized we weren't the first to discover this idyllic spot. The remains of a campsite lay before us, looking for all the world. Like its occupants had vanished in the middle of their stay, a tent stood in the center, its door flap open and swaying gently in the breeze. A small cooking pot sat on a makeshift fire pit. The ashes, long cold backpacks, and sleeping bags were scattered around as if their owners had fled in a hurry. Jimmy and I exchanged glances. This wasn't normal. Even the messiest campers usually packed up before moving on. "Hello," Jamie called out. "Anyone here?" His voice echoed through the clearing, met only by the soft gurgle of the stream and the rustle of leaves overhead. We approached cautiously. That's when I noticed the first slash in the tent, and then another and another. The entire structure was riddled with them, each cut precise and deliberate. What the hell, I breathed. Peering inside the ruined shelter, the interior was a mess. Sleeping bags were shredded clothes strewn about. A flashlight lay on its side, its beam creating eerie shadows as it illuminated a small notebook. I picked it up, flipping it open to the last entry. The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic. "Day 3, it's still out there. We can hear it moving around the camp at night. The others think I'm crazy, but I know what I saw. It's not a bear, it's not anything natural. God help us if it gets in." I showed the notebook to Jamie, watching as the color drained from his face. "We should go," he said. His voice barely above a whisper now, but as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. There, half hidden beneath a torn sleeping bag, was a camera. My hand shook as I picked it up, praying the battery wasn't dead. It wasn't. The screen flickered to life, showing the last image it taken. My heart nearly stopped. The photo was dark, clearly taken at night, but there, just at the edge of the frame, illuminated by the flash, was something, a shape that was almost human, but not quite, long, spindly limbs, a face that was more shadow than substance, and eyes that reflected the camera's flash like a cat's, but far larger. I dropped the camera, stumbling backwards. We need to leave now. But as I turned, I realized with horror that the sun had nearly set. The forest around us was deepening into twilight shadows, lengthening and merging into an impenetrable gloom. Jamie was all ready, gathering his pack. "We can make it back to the trail if we hurry," he said, his voice tense. "We'll hike through the night if we have to." I nodded, snatching up my own backpack, but as I turned to go, a glint of metal caught my eye. There, half buried in the soft earth near the fire pit, was a small silver locket. Without thinking, I scooped it up and shoved it in my pocket. We set off at a brisk pace, trying to retrace our steps in the fading light, but nothing looked familiar. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. More than once I could have sworn I heard something moving in the underbrush, always just out of sight. "Do you remember that weird symbol we saw earlier?" Jamie panted as we pushed through a particularly dense thicket. "I think I see another one." He was right there, carved into a massive oak was the same circle and line symbol we'd spotted before, but this one looked older, the edges of the carving weathered and moss-grown. "It's probably just a coincidence," I said, not believing my own words. "Hey, come on, we need to keep moving." But as we pressed on, more symbols appeared. Some were fresh, others ancient. They seemed to be guiding us, though to what I couldn't say. The darkness was nearly complete now, our headlamps creating small islands of light in a sea of blackness. The forest had gone completely silent, save for the crunch of our boots on fallen leaves and the increasingly ragged sound of our breathing. That's when we heard it, a low, guttural sound somewhere between a growl and a moan. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. At once, Jamie froze. "What was that?" I shook my head, unable to speak. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew that panicking now would only get us more lost. We pushed on, moving as quietly as we could, but the sounds continued, growing closer. Branches snapped behind us, something rustled in the sea canopy overhead, and then just ahead I saw a flicker of movement. A shape tall and impossibly thin slipped between two trees. In the brief flash of my headlamp, I caught a glimpse of pale, elongated limbs and a face that was little more than a dark void, with pinpricks of reflected light where eyes should be run. I yelled all thought of stealth forgotten. We crashed through the undergrowth. Blind panic driving us forward. Branches whipped at our faces, roots threatened to trip us at every step. The sounds behind us grew louder, a cacophony of inhuman shrieks and growls. I don't know how long we ran, it could have been minutes or hours, but suddenly, miraculously, we burst out onto a wide gravel road. A park ranger station stood just ahead, its windows glowing with welcoming light. We staggered towards it, gasping for breath as we reached the door. I chanced to look back at the forest. We just escaped there. At the edge of the trees stood a figure, tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. It raised a hand more claw than human appendage, and for a moment I thought it would pursue us into the light. But then it turned melting back into the shadows of the forest. In seconds it was gone, leaving no trace of its presence. The Rangers were skeptical of our story. Of course, they attributed our experience to exhaustion, dehydration, and an overactive imagination, but they did send out a search party to investigate the abandoned campsite. They found nothing, no slash tent, no scattered gear, not even a trace of a campfire. It was as if the entire scene had vanished into thin air. In the days that followed, as Jimmy and I recovered in a nearby town, I thought of that silver locket I'd pocketed in my panic when I finally worked up the courage to open it. I found a small photo inside a smiling family, mother, father, two kids posed in front of a familiar-looking clearing. I never reported finding the locket. Some part of me knew that doing so would only lead to more questions. Questions I wasn't sure I wanted. Answered Jamie, and I never finished our hike by unspoken agreement. We packed up and headed home, our adventure on the Appalachian Trail cut short. We don't talk much about what happened in those woods, but sometimes on dark nights when the wind whispers through the trees, I find myself thinking about that abandoned campsite, about the thing we saw in the forest. And I wonder, with a chill that goes bone deep, if somewhere out there in the deepest, darkest parts of the wilderness, it's thinking about us too. The scream that tore through the cab of my truck that night wasn't human. It couldn't have been. No person could make a sound like that, raw, primal, and filled with a terror so deep it made my blood run cold, but it came from the man sitting next to me. The hitchhiker I'd picked up just an hour before, and as his eyes flew open, reflecting the dashboard lights like some wild animals, I knew with sickening certainty that whatever had just happened, whatever he'd seen in his dreams, was far from over. My name's Jack, and I've been driving big rigs across the country for the better part of 2 decades. I've seen my fair share of weird stuff out on the lonely highways, ghost lights, inexplicable weather, even the occasional UFO. If you catch me after a few beers, but nothing, absolutely nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that moonless night in the middle of nowhere, Nevada. If had started as a routine haul Phoenix to Seattle with a trailer full of electronics, I was making good time, the miles melting away under my wheels as I cruised through the desert night. The radio kept me company, a mix of old country tunes and late-night talk shows about conspiracy theories and alien abductions. I was about halfway through Nevada when I saw him, a lone figure standing by the side of the road, thumb out. Now, I'm not usually one for picking up hitch. ERS, too many horror stories, too many risks. But something about this guy made me slow down. Maybe it was the lost look in his eyes, or the way he hugged himself against the chill desert wind. Whatever it was, before I knew it, I was pulling over. Where you headed? I called out as he approached. Anywhere. But here, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. I should have driven off right then, but instead I found myself saying, hop in. I'm going to Seattle if that works for you. He climbed into the passenger seat, bringing with him the smell of dust and something else, something I couldn't quite place up close. He looked young, maybe mid-20s, with shaggy brown hair and eyes that seemed to dart nervously around the cab. I'm Jack, I said. Pulling back onto the highway mic, he replied, not meeting my gaze. Thanks for the ride. We drove in silence for a while. The only sound, the rumble of the engine and the whisper of tires on asphalt. I tried to make conversation a few times, but Mike's responses were monosyllabic at best. Eventually, I gave up focusing on the road ahead. It was about an hour later when I noticed Mike had fallen asleep. His head lying against the window, I turned the radio down a notch, not wanting to disturb him. That's when things started to get weird. It began with a twitch, just a small movement of his hand. Then his breathing changed, becoming rapid and shallow. His eyes started moving frantically, behind closed lids like he was in the depths of some intense dream. I was just about to wake him, worried he might be having some kind of fit, when he started muttering. At first it was too low to make out, but it quickly grew louder. No, please don't let it find me. A chill ran down my spine. His voice was filled with pure, unadulterated fear. Hey, buddy, I said, reaching out to shake his shoulder. Wake up, you're having a nightmare. But he didn't wake. Instead, his muttering grew more frantic, his body starting to thrash in the seat. It's coming, oh God, it's coming, can't you see it? Can't you see its eyes? And that's when he let out that scream, the one that made me nearly drive off the road. His eyes flew open, wild and unfocused, reflecting the green glow of the dashboard like some nocturnal animal. I managed to pull over my heart, pounding in my chest. Mike, snap out of it. He turned to look at me, but his eyes seemed to be seeing something else. Something. Beyond me. It followed me. He whispered, his voice hoarse from screaming. Oh God, Jack, it followed me into the truck. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. What followed you, Mike? There's nothing here but us. He shook his head violently. You can't see it, but it's here. It's always here. His eyes darted around the cab, following something invisible. We have to get out now before I could stop him. He'd thrown open the passenger door and leapt out into the night. I cursed, fumbling with my seatbelt before following him. The desert night was cold and still. The only sound, the tick of the cooling engine and Mike's ragged breathing. He stood a few feet from the truck, arms wrapped around himself, shaking like a leaf. Mike, I said, approaching him slowly like you would a spooked animal. What's going on? What do you think is following you? He turned to me, his face pale in the truck's headlights. I don't know what it is, but it's been after me for days. Ever since I found that thing in the desert. What thing? I asked, a sick feeling growing in my gut. Mike reached into his pocket with a shaking hand, pulling out what looked like a small stone. But as he held it up, I realized it wasn't a stone at all. It was some kind of artifact carved with intricate symbols I'd never seen before. In the harsh glare of the headlights, it seemed to shimmer and shift as if the symbols were moving. I found this out there, Mike said, gesturing vaguely at the dark expanse of desert around us in some kind of old ruin. I thought it might be worth something. He laughed bitterly. I didn't. No, I didn't know it would wake it up. Wake what up? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Mike's eyes met mine, filled with a terror that made my blood run cold. The thing that lives in the spaces between the thing that hunts and dreams it wants this back. He held up the artifact, and it wants me for taking it. I wanted to tell him he was crazy, that he just had a nightmare, that there was no monster hunting him. But the conviction in his voice, the raw fear in his eyes, it was impossible to dismiss. Okay, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Okay, so why don't we just give it back, throw that thing away and done with it? Mike shook his head frantically. I've tried it, doesn't work like that. It's like it's attached to me now. The only way to get rid of it is to pass it on to someone else, to make them take it. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what he was saying. That's why you were hitchhiking. You were trying to give it to someone else. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to, but I can't take it anymore. The dreams, the visions, it's driving me insane. I took a step back, suddenly very aware of how isolated we were out here in the desert. Night. Mike, I won't take that thing, please. He begged, holding out the artifact. Please, I can't do this anymore, just take it. You'll understand for a moment. I was tempted. The artifact seemed to call to me, the symbols swirling in a mesmerizing dance. But then I shook my head, snapping out of it. No, I said firmly, I won't do it, Mike. But I'll help you. We'll figure this out together. Okay, there's got to be a way to get rid of that thing without passing it on. Mike stared at me for a long moment. His expression unreadable, then slowly he nodded. Okay? He whispered. Okay, we'll try. We got back in the truck. The artifact safely wrapped in a cloth and stowed in the glove compartment as we pulled back onto the highway. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The night seemed darker, the shadows deeper, and more than once I could have sworn I saw something moving just at the edge of my headlights, something tall and thin with too many limbs. I don't know what happened to Mike. After I dropped him off in Reno, he said he was going to find an expert, someone who could help him get rid of the artifact for good. I gave him my number, made him promise to call, and let me know he was okay. It's been 3 months and I haven't heard from him sometimes. On long night drives through the desert, I find myself scanning the side of the road, half expecting to see him standing there, thumb out, and sometimes in the moments between sleeping and waking, I see shapes in the shadows of my room, tall, twisted shapes with too many eyes. I tell myself it's just my imagination, just the lingering effects of that strange night. But deep down, I know the truth. Whatever was hunting Mike that night, whatever lived in his dreams, it's out there still waiting, watching. And sometimes when the night is darkest and the road stretches endlessly before me, I can't shake the feeling that it's watching me too. The leather-bound journal fell open in my hands, its yellowed pages releasing a musty cloud of dust and decay. At first I thought it was just another relic of the farm's long history, maybe a record of crop yields or livestock lineages, but as my eyes skimmed, the faded spidery handwriting, my heart began to race. This was no ordinary farm ledger. The words human subject and genetic manipulation leapt out at me, and I realized with growing horror that I'd stumbled upon something far darker than I could have imagined. Little did I know this discovery would plunge me into a nightmare that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the quiet rural world around me. My name's Sam, and I'd only been working at Willow Creek Farm for about a month when I found the journal fresh out of Collie College with an agriculture degree and dreams of someday owning my own farm. I jumped at the chance to work as a farmhand for old Mr. Harrison. The pay wasn't great, but the experience was invaluable, and there was something charming about the sprawling, slightly run-down property with its weathered barns and endless fields. Mr. Harrison was a quiet man, gruff but fair. He lived alone in the big farmhouse, his wife long dead, and his children moved away to the city. He didn't talk much about the farm's history, just gave me my daily tasks and left me to it. I spent my days mending fences, tending to the small herd of cattle, and helping to plant and harvest the crops. It was a hot, sticky afternoon in late July when Mr. Harrison asked me to clear out one of the old barns. Been meaning to do it for years, he'd grumbled. Might as well put you to use on it. Just pile up anything that looks worth keeping. Haul the rest to the burn pile. The barn was a cavernous structure, its interior dim and cool compared to the sweltering heat outside dust. Mows danced in the shafts of sunlight that streamed through, gaps in the weathered boards. The air was thick with the smell of old hay and something else, something chemical that I couldn't quite place. I started in one corner sorting through piles of rusted farm equipment, moldering sacks of feed and broken furniture. It was monotonous work, and my mind wandered as I hauled item after item to the growing pile outside. That's when I noticed the loose floorboard. I might have missed it entirely, if my boot hadn't caught on the edge, nearly sending me sprawling curious. I knelt down to examine it. The board shifted easily under my hands, and as I lifted it, I saw a small space underneath. Just big enough to hide something, the journal was wrapped in oilcloth. Surprisingly well preserved, considering its hiding place. I pulled it out, glancing over my shoulder guiltily, though I knew Mr. Harrison was off in the fields. It felt invasive reading someone else's private thoughts, but my curiosity got the better of me as I began to read that curiosity quickly turned to confusion, then to horror. The journal belonged to a Dr. Elliot Harrison, dated 1954. Mr. Harrison's father, I realized, but this was no ordinary farmer. The pages detailed complex scientific experiments far beyond anything I'd learned in my agriculture courses. Dr. Harrison wrote about his attempts to create hardier, more productive livestock through genetic manipulation, but it wasn't just animals he was experimenting on. There were detailed notes about human subjects, vague references to volunteers from the local asylum. My hand shook as I turned the pages, descriptions of failed experiments of creatures that were neither fully human nor fully animal. Sketches that turned my stomach, and throughout it all a growing sense of the doctor's obsession, his conviction that he was on the verge of a breakthrough that would revolutionize agriculture and change the world. The final entry, dated 1963, was different. The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic. It's done, the experiment was a success. But at what cost? They're out there now. Hiding in the woods and the fields. I can hear them at night scratching at the walls. God forgive me for what I've created. I snaped the journal shut, my heart pounding. Hey, this had to be some kind of sick joke, right? Or maybe the ramblings of a madman. There was no way any of this could be real. But even as I tried to rationalize it, memories of odd occurrences around the farm began to surface. The strange noises I'd heard at night, dismissed as wildlife, the areas of the property. Mr. Harrison had warned me to avoid the way the cattle sometimes seemed spooked by something I couldn't see. I shoved the journal back into its hiding place. My mind reeling, I needed to get out of this barn to get some fresh air and clear my head. As I stepped outside, blinking in the harsh sunlight, I nearly ran into Mr. Harrison making progress. He asked, eyeing the pile of junk I'd accumulated. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Did he know about the journal, about what his father had done? Mr. Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly, as if sensing my unease. Everything all right, Sam. You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, I managed to say, just, it's hot in there, needed some air. He nodded slowly. Well, don't work too hard. Come on up to the house when you're done. I'll fix us some dinner. I watched him walk away, trying to reconcile the kind of gruff old man I knew. With the dark history I just uncovered, was he continuing his father's work? Or was he just as much a victim of it as anyone else that night? As I lay in bed in the small apartment above the garage that Mr. Harrison had given me, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old building, every rustle from the fields outside set my nerves on edge. I kept thinking about the journal, about the creatures Dr. Harrison had written about. Were they still out there after all these years? A sudden noise outside my window made me bolt upright. It was a strange guttural sound, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. My heart pounding, I crept to the window and peered out into the darkness. At first I saw nothing, but then movement caught my eye. Something was moving in the field. Beyond the barn, something large and definitely not a cow. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, and then it turned, and I caught a glimpse of its face in the moonlight. I stumbled back from the window, biting back a scream. What I'd seen, it wasn't human, but it wasn't fully animal either. It was something in between, something that should not exist. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bed, every muscle tense, listening to the sounds of movement outside. When dawn finally broke, I was exhausted but relieved. Surely in the light of day, everything would make sense again. But as the days passed, strange occurrences began to multiply. Tools would go missing, only to turn up in odd places. The cattle grew increasingly agitated, especially at night, and more than once I caught Mr. Harrison staring off into the woods with a troubled expression. I thought about leaving, about packing up my things and getting as far away from Willow Creek Farm as I could, but something held me back. Curiosity, maybe, or a sense of responsibility, whatever. Dr. Harrison had done, whatever he'd created, it was still out there, and maybe there was something I could do about it. I began my own investigations carefully. At first I reread the journal, making notes, trying to understand the science behind Dr. Harrison's experiments. I explored the far reaches of the property areas Mr. Harrison had told me to avoid, looking for signs of the creatures, and slowly I started to piece together the truth. The experiments hadn't ended with Dr. Harrison's last journal entry. They'd continued, passed down from father to son. Mr. Harrison wasn't just aware of what his father had done, He was trying to fix it. It all came to a head one stormy night in late August. I was awakened by the sound of breaking glass and Mr. Harrison's shouts. I raced to the farmhouse, rain lashing at my face, to find the front door splintered and hanging off its hinges. Inside the scene was chaos, furniture, overturned claw marks scoring the wall, and there in the center of the living room stood Mr. Harrison facing off against a creature that defied description, part human, part animal. Its body a patchwork of mismatched parts, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intelligence. "Sam," Mr. Harrison yelled when he saw me. The syringe on the mantel, I saw it then. A large syringe filled with a glowing blue liquid. Without thinking, I grabbed it and tossed it to Mr. Harrison in one smooth motion. He caught it and plunged it into the creature's neck. The thing L out, a howl that made my blood run cold. It thrashed wildly for a moment, then collapsed to the floor, its body seeming to melt and reform before my eyes. In moments, all that was left was an unconscious, very human-looking man. Mr. Harrison sank to his knees, his face a mask of exhaustion and relief. "It's over," he murmured. "It's finally over." In the days that followed, Mr. Harrison told me everything, how his father's experiments had created a handful of hybrid creatures, how they'd hidden in the woods for decades, occasionally venturing out to terrorize the farm, how he'd spent his life trying to find a cure, a way to reverse what his father had done. The man we'd captured that night was the last of them with him cured. The long nightmare was finally over, but the weight of it, the dark legacy of Willow Creek Farm, would stay with me forever. I still worked the farm with Mr. Harrison. We never spoke of that night to anyone else who would believe us, but sometimes on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the cornfields, I find myself scanning the tree line, wondering if we truly found them all, and I can't help but think about the thin line between scientific progress and playing God, and how easy it is to cross that line with the best of intentions. The secrets of Willow Creek Farm are buried now as they should be, but the lessons about responsibility, about the unforeseen consequences of our actions, those will stay with me always, and I'll never look at a quiet rural farm quite the same way. Again, the footprints ended abruptly in the middle of the field, as if their owner had simply vanished into thin air. I stood there, flashlight in hand, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. 20 years on the force, and I'd never encountered anything like this. The car was still running, keys in the ignition, the driver's personal belongings untouched. It was as if the driver had stepped out for a moment and just disappeared. Little did I know this seemingly routine call would lead me down a rabbit hole of inexplicable events and unsolved mysteries that would haunt me for years to come. My name's Sarah Jennings, and I've been a state trooper in Nevada for 2 decades. I thought I'd seen it all. High-speed chases, horrific accidents, even the occasional UFO report from some poor soul who'd been out in the desert heat too long. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night on a lonely stretch of highway. 50 deep in the heart of what locals call the loneliest road in America. It started as a typical night shift. I was cruising along the highway, more tumbleweed than traffic keeping me company. When the call came in, a passing motorist had reported an abandoned vehicle on the side of the road, hazard lights blinking, standard procedure. I'd check it out, call a tow if necessary, and be on my way. As I pulled up behind the vehicle, a late model sedan, nothing remarkable about it, I noticed something odd. The engine was still running. I approached cautiously, one hand on my holster out of habit. The driver's side door was slightly ajar, but there was no sign of the driver. I shone my flashlight into the interior. Everything looked normal. A half-empty water bottle in the cup holder, a phone charging on the dashboard, a duffel bag in the back seat. No signs of a struggle, no blood. Nothing to indicate foul play. "Hello?" I called out, sweeping my flashlight across the surrounding area. "Anyone there?" "Highway patrol only." The whisper of the desert wind answered me. That's when I noticed the footprints, a single set leading away from the driver's side door into the field. Adjacent to the highway, they were clear and purposeful, not the staggering tracks of someone injured or disoriented. I radioed in my situation and began to follow the prints. The field was mostly bare, scrub brush rush, and hard-packed earth. Easy to see the trail in the beam of my flashlight. I expected to find the driver relieving themselves behind a bush, or maybe having wandered off in confusion. Instead, I found nothing. The footprints stopped abruptly about 50 yards into the field. One moment they were there clear as day, and the next nothing, just undisturbed earth stretching out into the darkness. I stood there for a long moment, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. People don't just vanish. There had to be an explanation. I searched the area, thoroughly widening my circle, looking for any sign of disturbance. Nothing. No scuff marks to indicate someone had jumped or been lifted. No signs of a struggle. Just those footprints ending in the middle of nowhere. By the time backup arrived, I was sweating. Despite the cool night air, my colleague Mike took one look at my face and knew something was off. "What have we got, Sarah?" He asked, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. I explained the situation, showing him the car, the footprints, the impossible ending. He followed me out into the field, his own bewilderment growing with each step. "This is weird," he said, finally standing at the end of the trail. "Really weird," we called in forensics, had the area cordoned off. The next few hours were a blur of activity, photographing the scene, taking casts of the footprints, searching the vehicle. The driver was identified as one David Chen, 37, a software engineer from San Francisco. His family was contacted. No, they hadn't heard from him. Yes, he was driving to visit them in Denver. No, he had no history of mental illness or erratic behavior. As dawn broke, seeing long shadows across the field, we were no closer to an explanation. David Chen had simply vanished, leaving behind a running car and a set of footprints that led nowhere. In the days that followed the investigation, intensified search parties combed the area. Helicopters with thermal imaging scanned for miles around David's phone. Records, bank statements, and internet history were scrutinized. Missing persons bulletins were issued across multiple states. Nothing. Not a single clue as to what had happened to David Chen. Theories abounded, each more outlandish than the last. Some suggested he'd been abducted by criminals, by AOCC cult, by aliens. Others proposed he'd staged his own disappearance. There was talk of secret government experiments, of portals to other dimensions. I tried to stay grounded, to focus on the facts, but the more I dug into the case, the stranger things became. A week after David's disappearance, I received an anonymous tip. The caller, a trembling voice disguised by some kind of modulator, told me to look into something called the Highway of Tears. At first I dismissed it as another crackpot lead, but something about the caller's urgency stuck with me that night. Unable to sleep, I started researching. What I found chilled me to the bone. The Highway of Tears, it turned out, wasn't just one highway. It was a phenomenon reported across multiple states, even multiple countries. Lonely stretches of road where people had vanished, without a trace, often leaving behind vehicles in perfect working order. In some cases, there were reports of strange lights in the sky. In others, witnesses described a feeling of lost time, of the world around them seeming to shift and change. The deeper I dug, the more cases I found that mirrored. David's a woman in Alaska whose car was found running, her purse still on the seat. Footprints leading into the snow before suddenly stopping. A truck driver in Australia who vanished while making a routine delivery. His rig discovered idling on the side of the Outback Highway. I began to compile a file cross-referencing cases, looking for patterns. Most of the disappearances happened at night. Many occurred in remote areas. In several cases, witnesses reported electronic malfunctions, radios cutting out phones, losing signal just before the disappearances. As my off-duty hours became consumed by this research, I could feel myself changing. I became jumpy, paranoid. Every time I patrolled that stretch of Highway 50, I found myself scanning the horizon, half expecting to see strange lights or shadowy figures. My colleagues noticed the change. Mike confronted me about it one night over coffee at the station. "Sarah, you've got to let this go," he said, his eyes full of concern. "The Chen case is cold. It's eating you up." I wanted to tell him everything about the Highway of Tears, about the patterns I'd discovered, but I knew how it would sound. I'd be taken off active duty, sent to psych EVB, so I nodded, promised to take. some time off to get my head straight, but I couldn't let it go. The next night I found myself back on Highway 50 off duty. My personal vehicle loaded with cameras and scanning equipment I'd borrowed from a friend in the UFO watching community. I don't know what I expected to find proof. Maybe something to make sense of the senseless, to explain the inexplicable. What I got was something else entirely. It was just after midnight when my radio started to crackle with static. At first I thought nothing of it. Reception was spotty out here at the best of times, but then I noticed the lights on my dashboard flickering. My headlights dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again. Heart pounding. I pulled over to the side of the road. This was it. The electronic interference reported in other cases. I grabbed my camera ready to document whatever came next. That's when I saw it. A light in the field beside the highway. Not a flashlight or a vehicle headlight, but something different. It pulsed with a soft bluish glow, hovering about 6 feet off the ground. I stepped out of my car camera. Forgotten in my hand, the light seemed to beckon to me, pulling me forward. I took one step, then another. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice was screaming at me to stop, to get back in the car, to drive away as fast as I could. But it was drowned out by an overwhelming sense of curiosity, of longing. I had to know what the light was, had to understand. I don't know how long I walked. Time seemed to lose all meaning. The light stayed just ahead of me always. Just out of reach, I was vaguely aware of my feet moving, of the brush scraping against my legs, and then suddenly the light was gone. I blinked, disoriented. The spell broken, I found myself standing in the middle of the field. No idea how far I'd come. I turned back toward the highway, expecting to see my car's headlights. There was nothing. No car, no highway, just empty desert, stretching out in all directions, directions silvered by the light of a moon I didn't remember seeing earlier. Panic set in. I spun around, trying to get my bear. That's when I saw them footprints in the dirt, my footprints leading to. Where I stood and beyond them, another set of prints. Familiar prints that I'd seen once before, ending abruptly in the middle of nowhere. I stood there, my mind reeling as the full weight of my situation crashed down upon me. I understood now. I was no longer the investigator. I had become part of the mystery. As the first light of dawn began to creep across the horizon, I made a decision. I would follow those footprints. David Chen's footprints, whatever had happened to him, whatever lay beyond that impossible ending. I would find out. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever came next. Then I stepped forward, leaving my own trail of footprints in the desert sands somewhere out there in the vast emptiness of the Nevada desert. There's an abandoned car with its engine still running and a set of footprints leading nowhere. The highway of tears had claimed another victim, and I had become just another unsolved mystery on the loneliest road in America. The first footprint appeared like a phantom in the morning dew, its shape unmistakably human, yet far too large to belong to any of us. I stared at it, my coffee mug forgotten in my hand, as the rising sun cast long shadows across our ravaged campsite. Our food was strewn about, tents slashed, and an eerie silence hung in the air where birdsongs should have been. But it was that single massive footprint that sent a chill down my spine. Whatever had visited us in the night was no ordinary animal, and I had a sickening feeling it wasn't done with us yet. My name's Alex, and this camping trip was supposed to be a chance for my family to reconnect, to escape the constant buzz of technology, and remember what it was like to just be together. My wife Sarah, our 2 kids, Lily and Max, and I had spent months planning this getaway to Blue Pine Campground, a remote site nestled deep in the mountains. We'd arrived late yesterday afternoon, the kids buzzing with excitement as we set up our tents and gathered wood for the fire. As the sun set, we roasted marshmallows and told ghost stories, our laughter echoing through the trees. It felt perfect, like we'd finally found a way to pause the hectic pace of our lives and just breathe. If only I'd known then how quickly our idyllic retreat would turn into a nightmare. The first sign that something was wrong came in the middle of the night. I woke to the sound of rustling outside our tent, far too loud to be a raccoon or any of the small wildlife we'd been warned about. Grabbing my flashlight, I unzipped the tent flap and peered out the beam of light. Caught a flash of movement at the edge of our campsite. Something large ducked behind a tree too quickly for me to make out its shape. Heart pounding, I zipped the tent back up and lay awake for hours listening to the sounds of something large moving around our camp. When morning came, the full extent of the intrusion became clear. Our cooler had been upended, its contents scattered across the ground, claw marks scored the sides of our tents, and there in a patch of bare earth was that enormous footprint. "Alex? What's going on?" Sarah's voice snapped me out of my daze. She stood in the entrance of our tent, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. I tried to keep my voice calm for her sake. Looks like we had a visitor last night, probably a bear. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Bears didn't leave footprints like that as Sarah woke the kids and we began to clean up the mess. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest around us seemed too quiet, the shadows between the trees too deep. "Dad, can we go home now?" Lily asked, her voice small and frightened as she clutched her stuffed rabbit. I wanted nothing more than to say yes to pack up our things and drive back to the safety of civilization. But when I tried to start the car, my blood ran cold. The engine sputtered and died, refusing to turn over, no matter how many times I tried. "It's okay," I told my family, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel, probably just a dead battery. "I'll hike down to the ranger station and get help." Sarah grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "You can't go out there alone. What if whatever did this is still out there?" I hesitated. She was right, of course, but what choice did we have? In the end, we decided to stick together. We packed some supplies and started down the trail towards the ranger station. It was only 5 miles, an easy hike under normal circumstances, but with every snapping twig and rustle in the underbrush, our nerves frayed a little more. We were about halfway there when Max spotted it, another footprint. This one pressed into a patch of mud beside the trail. It was even larger than the first and fresher. "It's following us," Sarah whispered, pulling the kids close. I wanted to reassure her, to say it was probably just coincidence, but the words stuck in my throat. Because deep down I knew she was right. We picked up our pace, the kids whimpering as branches scratched at their arms and legs. The sun was starting to set, the forest growing darker by the minute, and still the ranger station seemed no closer. That's when we heard an low rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. At once Lily screamed and Max burst into tears. "Run!" I yelled, scooping up Lily as Sarah grabbed Max's hand. We tore down the trail, blind panic driving us forward. Branches whipped at our faces. Roots threatened to trip us at every step, and all the while that growl grew louder, closer. I chanced to look back and immediately wished I hadn't. Something was moving through the trees behind us, something massive and dark. I caught a glimpse of glowing eyes and a flash of teeth. Before I turned back, running faster than I ever had in my life, we burst into a small clearing, gasping for breath, and there, like a miracle, was a cabin. Not the ranger station we'd been aiming for, but at that moment it looked like salvation. I didn't stop to question our luck. We raced for the door, praying it would be unlocked. The handle turned under my grip and we tumbled inside, slamming the door behind us for a long moment. We just stood there, chests heaving, listening to the sounds of something large circling the cabin. Scratching noises came from the walls and a low, frustrated growl echoed through the night. "What is it?" "Daddy?" Lily whimpered, burying her face in my shoulder. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said, stroking her hair. "But we're safe in here. It can't get us." As our eyes adjusted to the gloom, we began to take in our surroundings. The cabin was small, just one room with a fireplace, a few pieces of rustic furniture, and shelves lined with canned goods and supplies. It looked like some kind of emergency shelter or hunting cabin. Sarah found some lanterns and lit them, casting a warm glow around the room as the kids huddled together on a threadbare couch. She pulled me aside. "Alex, what are we going to do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What if it doesn't leave?" I took a deep breath, trying to think rationally. We've got shelter and it looks like there's enough food here to last a while. We'll wait it out. Someone's bound to come looking for us eventually. But as the night wore on, that confidence began to waver. The creature outside showed no signs of leaving. We could hear it moving around the cabin, testing the walls and door. Occasionally, it would let out a roar that made the windows rattle. The kids finally fell into an uneasy sleep. Exhausted from the day's terror, Sarah and I took turns keeping watch, peering out the windows into the darkness. It was during my watch in the darkest hours of the night that I saw it clearly. For the first time, the moon had come out from behind the clouds, illuminating the clearing in front of the cabin, and there, standing at the edge of the trees, was a creature that shouldn't exist. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, with a body that seemed to be a patchwork of animal. Parts thick fur covered most of its body, but I could see patches of scales and what looked like feathers. Its face was a nightmarish blend of bear and something almost human, with eyes that glowed an unnatural yellow in the moonlight as I watched. Frozen in horror, it turned those glowing eyes directly towards me, and then impossibly it smiled, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. This couldn't be real. Creatures like that didn't exist, they couldn't. But the growl that rumbled through the night was very, very real. I don't know how long we stayed in that cabin, days blurred together, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun and the constant presence of the creature outside. We rationed the food carefully, knowing we might be in for a long wait. The kids were surprisingly resilient, turning our confinement into a game of sorts, but I could see the strain wearing on Sarah, the constant fear taking its toll on what I think was the 5th day we woke to silence. No growls, no scratching at the walls. Cautiously, I peered out the window. The clearing was empty. We waited another full day before we dared to venture out. The forest seemed normal again, birds singing, small animals scurrying about. But the claw marks on the cabin walls and the massive footprints in the mud were undeniable proof that our ordeal had been real. We made our way back to our campsite, half expecting to find it destroyed. Instead, we found park rangers and a search party. Our car had been fixed. Apparently, someone had noticed it sitting abandoned and called it in. We told them a sanitized version of events, that we'd gotten lost, found the cabin, and waited out a storm. Who would believe the truth as we drove home, the kids chattering excitedly about their adventure. I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd glimpsed something we were never meant to see, a creature that lurked in the shadows of the world. Defying explanation, we never went camping again. But sometimes on dark nights, when the wind howls outside our safely locked doors, I find myself thinking about that cabin in the woods, and I wonder if somewhere out there in the vast wilderness that creature is still roaming, waiting for the next unsuspecting family to cross its path. The wilderness holds secrets ancient and terrifying, and sometimes those secrets have teeth and claws. The first thing I noticed was the silence on a cruise ship carrying over 3,000 passengers and 150 crew members. Silence is never a good sign. I stood in the middle of the Leo deck, where just hours ago families had been splashing in the pool and music had been blaring from the speakers. Now there was nothing but the gentle lapping of waves against the hull and the distant hum of engines. As I turned in a slow circle, taking in the abandoned lounge chairs and half-empty cocktails, a chill ran down my spine. Where was everyone, and why did the air suddenly feel so different? My name is Mia Chen, and what should have been a relaxing Caribbean cruise turned into the most bewildering and terrifying experience of my life. I'm still not sure I believe what happened to me, but I know one thing for certain: time isn't as linear as we think it is, and sometimes the fabric of reality can slip in ways we can't begin to understand. It had started as a typical day at sea. I'd woken up late, nursed a slight hangover from the previous night's karaoke party with a greasy breakfast, and spent the morning lounging by the pool with my latest beach read. Around noon, I decided to head back to my cabin for a quick nap before the afternoon's activities. I remember closing my eyes, the gentle rocking of the ship lulling me to sleep when I woke up. The light filtering through my porthole window seemed off dimmer somehow, with a strange bluish quality I'd never seen before. Disoriented, I checked my phone. The screen was black, completely dead, despite having been fully charged when I lay down. Frowning, I got up and tried the cabin's phone. Nothing but a faint buzzing on the line. That's when I noticed the silence. No distant laughter from the hallway. No muffled announcements over the PA system. Just nothing, a knot of unease forming in my stomach. I stepped out into the hallway. It was deserted. The usual bustle of passengers and crew members conspicuously absent. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud on the carpeted floor as I made my way towards the elevator bank. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and lost in the empty corridor. No response. The elevator arrived with a cheerful ding that seemed wildly out of place in the eerie silence. As I rode up to the Leo deck, I tried to rationalize what was happening. Maybe there was some sort of emergency drill I'd slept through. But no, they always announce those well in advance, and surely someone would have woken me when the elevator doors opened onto the Leo deck. The full extent of the strangeness hit me. The massive open-air deck was completely deserted. Lounge chairs sat empty, some with towels and books still draped over them, as if their occupants had just stepped away for a moment. The bars were unmanned. Rows of colorful cocktails abandoned on their counters. I walked slowly around the deck, my heart pounding. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. "Is anyone here?" Only the sound of the waves answered me as I completed my circuit of the deck. I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The lifeboats were all still in place. If there had been some kind of emergency evacuation, surely they would have been launched. I spent the next few hours searching the ship deck by deck, my panic growing with each empty room and deserted corridor. I encountered the theater mid-setup for the evening's show, the casino slot machines blinking silently in the dim light, the main dining room table set for a dinner that would never be served. Everywhere I looked, I found sign of life, interrupted half-eaten meals in the buffet, a load of laundry tumbling endlessly in a dryer in the otherwise empty laundromat. A child stuffed animal dropped in the middle of a hallway, but of the thousands of people who should have been on board, I found no trace as night fell, or what I assumed was night. Given the deepening of that strange bluish light, I made my way to the bridge, hoping against hope to find anyone who could explain what was happening. The bridge was as deserted as the rest of the ship, but at least here there were signs of life. Radar screens blinked, showing our position in the middle of the Caribbean. Sea navigation systems hummed softly. The ship was still on course, its automated systems continuing their work. Even in the absence of human oversight, I slumped into the captain's chair, exhaustion and fear finally overtaking me. What had happened? Where was everyone, and more importantly, what was I going to do now? As I sat there staring blankly at the array of instruments before me, something caught my eye. The date display on one of the monitors. I blinked. Sure, I must be seeing things. But no, there it was in glowing green letters. August 13th, 2024, a week. Somehow impossibly a week had passed since I'd laid down for my nap. I laughed then. A high hysterical sound that echoed weirdly in the empty bridge. This couldn't be happening. People didn't just lose a week of time. Entire ships full of people didn't just vanish. And yet here I was the next few days, if they were indeed days. As time seemed to have lost all meaning, passed in a blur, I roamed the ship, leaving notes in every public space, begging for a response, for some sign that I wasn't alone. I tried every phone, every radio, every possible means of communication, but was met with nothing but static. I ate from the slowly rotting supplies in the ship's massive kitchen, slept fitfully in a different cabin each night, and tried to keep myself sane by talking out loud, narrating my actions as if I was the protagonist in some bizarre reality show on what I think was the 4th day of my solitude. I saw the lights at first. I thought I was hallucinating, my mind finally cracking under the strain of isolation. But no, they were distant pinpricks of light on the horizon, growing larger by the minute. Hope surged through me. Another ship, a rescue party. I raced to the bow, waving my arms and shouting, even though I knew they were still too far away to see or hear me. As the lights grew closer, I realized with a start that they weren't coming from the sea, but from the sky. My elation turned to confusion, then to a kind of numb acceptance. Of course, why not after everything else? Why shouldn't there be strange lights in the sky? The lights descended slowly, hovering over the ship. They were beautiful, pulsing with colors. I had no names for casting. Shimmering reflections on the calm sea as I watched a beam of light shot down from the center of the formation, touching the deck just a few feet away from me, and then as suddenly as they had appeared, the lights vanished and I was no longer alone. The deck was filled with people, passengers in swimsuits and sundresses, crew members in their crisp uniforms. They milled about in confusion, voices rising in a babble of questions and exclamations. What happened? Where did everyone go? Was I dreaming? I stood frozen, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. A man in a captain's uniform strode purposefully towards me, his face a mask of concern. Miss, are you all right? You look pale. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I possibly explain what had happened in the days that followed as the ship made its way back to port? A story was pieced together according to everyone else on board. No time had passed at all. One moment they had been going about their day, the next they had found themselves standing on the deck disoriented and confused. Only I remembered the empty ship, the days of solitude, the strange lights. Only I had lived through that impossible week. The incident made headlines around the world. Cruise ship reappears. After mysterious disappearance, experts were consulted, theories were proposed and debunked. Some spoke of wormholes, others of alien abduction. A few fringe voices even suggested a mass hallucination or an elaborate hoax, FKS. As for me, I gave my statement to the authorities and then retreated from the public eye. How could I explain something I didn't understand myself? How could I describe the profound loneliness of those days on the empty ship, the bone-deep wrongness of a world? Slightly out of sync, I've never set foot on another cruise ship. The sight of the ocean fills me with a nameless dread, and sometimes in the deepest hours of the night I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that I'm back there alone on an empty ship, adrift in a sea of time. I don't know what happened on the paradise of the seas. I don't know where everyone went or why I was left behind or what those lights in the sky were. But I do know this: our understanding of reality of time and space is far more limited than we think. There are things out there, forces at work that we can't begin to comprehend, and sometimes if we're very unlucky, we catch a glimpse of them, a peek behind the curtain of reality into the vast, terrifying unknown that lies beyond. I got that glimpse and it changed me forever, so the next time you're on a cruise, or any ship for that matter, and you feel a sudden chill or notice the quality of light change ever so slightly, or find yourself alone in a place that should be crowded, remember my story and hope with every fiber of your being that you don't slip through the cracks of time like I did. Because trust me, once you've experienced that kind of impossible solitude, you're never quite the same again. The scratching started on the first night, a faint persistent sound that could have been tree branches against the cabin's wooden walls, if not for the absolute stillness of the air outside. I lay awake, Emily's steady breathing beside me, and listened as the noise grew louder, more deliberate. It wasn't until I heard a distinct tapping on the bedroom window that I realized with a chill that ran deep into my bones that whatever was out there wasn't a tree, and it wanted in. My name is Daniel, and what was supposed to be a romantic getaway with my girlfriend turned into a waking nightmare that I'm still trying to understand. We'd been dating for a year, and with both of us drowning in work stress, a week in a secluded cabin seemed like the perfect escape. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just us in the great outdoors. If only we'd known what was waiting for us in those woods. We arrived at the cabin late Friday afternoon. It was exactly as advertised. A cozy two-bedroom log structure nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the dirt road leading to the property had been rough enough to make us question our decision more than once. But as we stepped out of the car, the fresh mountain air and the absolute quiet washed away our doubts. This was exactly what we needed. The cabin's owner, a gruff older man named Bill, met us with the keys as he gave us a quick tour. I couldn't help but notice how his eyes darted nervously around, never quite settling on one spot. Now, a couple things to remember, he said as we stood on the porch. Don't go wandering in the woods. After dark, lots of wildlife out there, and it's easy to get turned around, and if you hear any strange noises at night, just ignore them, probably just raccoons or something. I nodded, not thinking much of it at the time. Every cabin owner had their quirks and warnings. Oh, and one more thing. Bill added his hand on the door. Whatever you do, don't open the doors or windows at night no matter what you hear. Got it. Before we could ask what he meant, he was gone, his truck kicking up dust as he sped down the dirt road. Emily and I exchanged glances. Well, that was weird, she said with a nervous laugh. I shrugged it off. Probably just trying to scare the city. Folk, come on, let's unpack. The rest of the day was perfect. We hiked a nearby trail, cooked dinner on the old wood stove, and spent the evening cuddled up on the porch swing, watching the stars come out in a sky unspoiled by light pollution. It wasn't until we were getting ready for bed that I noticed the scratches. They were on the inside of the doors and around the windows, long deep gouges in the wood that looked like they'd been made by something with very sharp claws. Em, come look at this, I called out. She came over frowning as she ran her fingers over the marks. Weird, you think a bear tried to get in or something. Maybe I said, though, something about the scratch made my skin crawl. They seemed too deliberate, too purposeful. We went to bed joking about ghost bears to lighten the mood, but as the night wore on and the scratching started, those jokes didn't seem funny anymore. I lay there, every muscle tense, listening to the sound move around the cabin, scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, pause. Then the tapping on the window. Like something was testing the glass, Emily stirred beside me. Dan, do you hear that? I nodded, not trusting my voice. We clung to each other, barely breathing as the tapping moved from window to window. Finally, after what felt like hours, it stopped. We eventually fell into an uneasy sleep as dawn began to break. The next morning, we tried to rationalize what had happened. Raccoons, wow, we decided, or maybe a particularly persistent owl. We spent the day hiking and swimming in a nearby lake, the bright sunshine making the terrors of the night seem distant and silly. But as evening fell and we returned to the cabin, that sense of unease crept back. We double-checked all the locks, drew the curtains tight, and tried to distract ourselves with board games and wine. The scratching started earlier that night, more insistent than before, and this time it was accompanied by something else, a low, guttural sound that was almost but not quite a voice. Emily whispered, her face pale in the lamplight. That's not an animal, I wanted to reassure her, to say it was just the wind or our imaginations, playing tricks on us. But as the not-quite voice grew louder, forming sounds that were almost words, I couldn't lie to her or myself. We huddled together on the bed, watching the shadows under the door, listening to whatever was out there. Circled the cabin again and again. At one point, something heavy threw itself against the front door, making the whole cabin shudder. I thought about making a run for the car, but the keys were in the living room and the idea of opening any door seemed impossible, so we waited clinging to each other as the night stretched on endlessly. Just before dawn, in that darkest hour, when hope seems furthest away, we heard a new sound. Footsteps on the porch, then a knock at the door, a human knock. Hello? Anyone in there? A man's voice. Gruff but blessedly normal, we approached the door cautiously through the peephole. I could see Bill, the cabin owner, standing on the porch with a flashlight. I opened the door, relief flooding through me. Bill, thank God there's something out here. Something. He cut me off, pushing past us into the cabin. I know that's why I'm here, you two. Okay? We nodded, still shaken. Bill did a quick circuit of the cabin, checking the windows and doors. When he was satisfied, he turned to us with a grim expression. I owe you an apology, he said. I should have told you the whole truth when you got here, but I was afraid you'd leave and I need the money. If I'm being honest, told us what Emily demanded. What the hell is going on here? Bill sighed, suddenly looking much older, this land. It's not right. Never has been long. As I can remember, things live in these woods, things that ain't natural. Most of the time they keep to themselves, but sometimes, especially when there's new blood around, they get curious. I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of things? He shook his head. I don't rightly know, never seen him clearly, but I've heard him felt them watching. They're smart, whatever they are, smart and hungry. Why don't you leave? Emily asked. Can't, Bill said simply. This land's been in my family for generations. And besides, he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, I don't think they'd let me. We spent the rest of that night huddled in the living room with Bill, listening to his stories of the things that lived in the woods. Tales passed down through his family of people who'd vanished over the years of nights when the barriers between our world and something else seemed to thin. As the sun rose, casting long shadows through the trees, Bill stood up. They'll be gone now. They can't stand the daylight. You two should pack up and go. I'll refund your money. We didn't argue. Within an hour, we were in our car speeding. Down the mountain road, the cabin receding in our rearview mirror, we never talked much about what happened that weekend. How could we explain it to anyone else, even between ourselves? We found it easier to let the memory fade to focus on our normal, safe lives in the city, but sometimes on dark nights. When the wind blows just right, I find myself listening for that scratching sound, and in my dreams I still hear that almost voice calling from just beyond the walls, trying to form words I hope I never understand. I don't know what lives in those woods. I don't know why it was so interested in us or what it might have done if it had gotten inside. But I do know this: there are places in this world where the veil between realities is thin, where things we can't comprehend lure just out of sight. If you ever find yourself in a secluded cabin, miles from civilization, and you hear a scratching at the door or a tapping at the window, remember my story. Keep the doors locked, the curtains drawn, and whatever you do, don't let it in, because once you acknowledge those things in the dark, once you let them know you can hear them, they'll never stop calling. And sooner or later, curiosity or fear or simple exhaustion might lead you to answer. Take it from me, some calls are better. Left unanswered, some doors are meant to stay closed, and some woods are best left unexplored, no matter how inviting they might seem in the light of day. The voice crackled through the CB radio, desperate and filled with static. Please, anyone, I need help. I'm at the old Starlight truck stop. Something's here. Oh God, it's coming back. Please hurry then. Nothing but dead. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white as I stared out at the empty highway stretching before me. The rational part of my brain said to ignore it, to keep driving. But 20 years on the road had taught me one thing out here. In the vast emptiness of the American night, sometimes a trucker is all that stands between a stranger and disaster with a muttered curse. I flipped on my turn signal and took the next exit. I didn't know it then, but that decision would lead me into a nightmare. I'm still trying to understand. My name is Mike Callahan, and I've been hauling freight across the country since I was old enough to get my CDL. I've seen my share of weird stuff out on the lonely highways, ghost lights, inexplicable weather patterns, even what some might call UFOs, but nothing in all my years prepared me for what I encountered that night at the abandoned Starlight truck stop. It was a typical run Seattle to Miami with a trailer full of electronics. I was making good time, the miles melting away under my wheels as I cruised through the New Mexico desert. The radio kept me company, a mix of old country tunes and the occasional chatter from other truckers. It was just past 2 a.m. when the distress call came through. At first I thought it was just some kids playing around on the channel. It wouldn't be the first time, but something in that voice, the raw fear, the desperation, made me think twice. I tried to respond to get more information, but there was no answer. Just that eerie static I knew. The Starlight. It had been a popular stop back in the day, a little oasis of neon and greasy food in the middle of nowhere, but it had shut down years ago. Another victim of the new highway bypass. Now it was just a crumbling relic slowly being reclaimed by the desert. As I took the exit, a cold feeling settled in my gut. What if this was a trap? It wouldn't be the first time someone tried to lure a trucker off the main road with a fake distress call. But I couldn't shake the memory of that terrified voice if someone really was in trouble out here. They didn't have many options for help. The old access road was barely more than a pair of tire tracks. Now weeds growing up through cracks in the asphalt. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating scrub brush and the occasional piece of wind-blown trash, and then rising out of the night like a ghost I saw it. The Starlight truck stop, it was in worse shape than I remembered. The once cheerful neon sign was dark, most of its tubes shattered. The windows of the main building were boarded up and half the roof had caved in. The vast parking lot, once filled with rigs from all over the country, was empty save for tumbleweeds and broken glass. I pulled up in front of the main entrance, leaving my engine running. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the idle of my truck and the creak of settling metal as the old building shifted in the night wind. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and lost in the emptiness. "Anyone here?" I heard a distress call on the CB. Nothing, not even an echo. I grabbed my flashlight from the cab and cautiously approached the building. The boards over the main doors had been pried away, leaving a dark maw that seemed to swallow my light. Every instinct screamed at me to get back in my truck and drive away, but I couldn't shake the memory of that desperate voice. What if someone was H in there, unable to call out? I stepped inside the beam of my flashlight, revealing a scene of decay and abandonment. Overturned tables, shattered plates, layers of dust covering everything. It looked like the place had been picked clean by scavengers. Years ago. "Hello," I called again, my voice echoing in the empty space. And anyone hear a sound from the back of the building made me jump, a scraping noise like something heavy being dragged across the floor. "Hey, you okay back there?" I moved towards the sound, my heart pounding as I rounded the corner into what used to be the kitchen. My flashlight beam fell on something that made my blood run cold. There, propped up against an old stove, was a CB radio. It looked brand new, completely out of place in the ruin around it. I approached slowly, my mind racing. Had the person who called for help left this here? But why and where were they now? That's when I noticed something else on the floor around the radio were strange markings, curved lines, and symbols drawn in what looked horribly like dried blood. I took a step back, suddenly very aware of how quiet it was. Even the wind seemed to have died down, and then I heard it. A low guttural sound coming from somewhere behind me. It was almost, but not quite, a voice. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I slowly turned around. There in the doorway was something. In the brief moment before terror overtook me, my mind tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It was vaguely humanoid, but too tall, too thin. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, and its face. God, its face was just a blank expanse of pale skin with a mouth that split it from top to bottom. I'd like to say I fought, or that I at least had the presence of mind to run, but the truth is I froze rooted to the spot as that thing unfolded itself, growing even taller as it flowed into the room like smoke given form. It reached for me with hands that were more like claws, and I felt my consciousness slipping away. The last thing I remember is the CB radio crackling to life, that same desperate voice calling out for help. I woke up in my truck parked on the side of the highway for a moment. I thought it had all been a vivid nightmare. But then I noticed the dust coating my clothes, the scratches on my arms, and there on the passenger seat was the CB radio from the abandoned truck stop. My logbook showed I'd lost almost 6 hours. 6 hours that I had no memory of. I drove to the nearest town in a day, checked into a motel, and tried to make sense of what had happened. Had I really seen what I thought I saw, or had my mind conjured up some impossible horror to fill in the gaps in my memory? I thought about going to the police, but what would I tell them? That I'd been lured to an abandoned truck stop by a ghost on the CB, then attacked by some kind of monster? They'd laugh me out of the station if they didn't lock me up for my own safety. In the end, I did the only thing I could do. I got back on the road and finished my run, but things were different. After that night, I found myself jumping at shadows, flinching. Every time the CB crackled with static, I started taking routes that avoided long stretches of empty highway, even if it meant longer trips. And that CB radio, I couldn't bring myself to get rid of it, but I couldn't stand to have it in my truck either. It sits in a storage unit now, wrapped in chains and locked in a box some nights. I swear I can hear it calling, that same desperate voice begging for help. I've tried to find out more about the Starlight truck stop since then. Turns out it has quite a history. Stories of disappearances going back decades. Truckers who stopped there and were never seen again. Local legends about ancient burial grounds and doorways to other worlds. I don't know what to believe anymore. I don't know if what I experienced was real or some kind of hallucination or something in between. But I do know this, there are things out there in the darkness that we can't explain, things that lurk on the edges of our world, waiting for someone to answer their call. So if you're ever out on the road late at night and you hear a desperate voice on the CB begging for help, think twice before you answer, because sometimes the call for help isn't coming from someone in trouble, sometimes it's coming from the trouble itself. And if you find yourself driving past an abandoned truck stop in the middle of the New Mexico desert, keep on driving, don't look back, and whatever you do, don't stop, because you never know what might be waiting there in the darkness ready to pull you into a nightmare you might never wake up from. As for me, I still drive, but never at night if I can help it. And I keep my CB turned off no matter how lonely the road gets, because I know now that some calls are better left unanswered, and some mysteries are best left unsolved. The first thing I noticed when I stepped out onto the porch that morning was the silence. No birdsong, no distant low of cattle, not even the rustle of wind through the cornfields. Just an eerie, oppressive quiet that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Then I saw it, a vast, intricate pattern. Carved D into my wheat field. The stalks bent and woven with impossible precision in that moment as the rising sun cast long shadows across the design. I knew my life would never be the same. What I didn't know was how deep the rabbit hole went, or how dangerous the truth would turn out to be. My name's Jack Harper, and I've been farming this land for over 30 years. It's been in my family for generations, passed down from father to son since my great-grandfather father first broke ground here in the 1890s. I've seen droughts, floods, and everything in between, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that summer. It started innocently enough. A few of my cows got spooked one night, breaking through a fence and stampeding across the north pasture. Unusual, but not unheard of. Then my tractor started acting up, the electronics going haywire for no apparent reason. Again, annoying, but nothing too out of the ordinary for aging farm equipment. But then came the lights. I first saw them about a week before the crop circle appeared. I was up late going over some paperwork in the kitchen when a flash of light outside caught my eye. At first I thought it was headlights from a passing car, but we're pretty isolated out here. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles down the road. I stepped outside, and that's when I saw them. 3 bright orbs of light hovering silently over my wheat field. They pulsed with an otherworldly glow, casting long shadows across the swaying stalks. I stood there frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes then. As suddenly as they appeared, the light shot straight up into the sky and vanished. I told myself I was tired, that maybe I dozed off at the kitchen table and dreamed the whole thing. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. The next few nights I stayed up watching, but the lights didn't return. Just as I was starting to think I'd imagined it all, I woke up to find the crop circle. It was massive, covering nearly half of my 100-acre wheat field. The design was incredibly complex, a series of interlocking circles and crescents that seemed to spiral out from a central point. The wheat stalks were bent, not broken, woven together in a way that defied explanation. I called the sheriff, more out of a sense of obligation than any real hope for answers. Bob's been a friend for years, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes as he surveyed the damage. I could be pranksters, he suggested, not sounding very convinced. You know how kids get in the summer looking for thrills? I shook my head. Bob, this would have taken a team of people all night to do, and they'd have left tracks. Look at the ground, there's not a single footprint or tire track anywhere. He didn't have an answer for that. Word spread quickly, as it tends to do in small towns. By noon, my driveway was clogged with curiosity seekers, amateur paranormal investigators, and local news crews. I did my best to keep them off my property, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. That's when things started to get really strange. It began with the animals. My dogs, usually friendly to a fault, became aggressive. SN snarling at anyone who came near the crop circle. The cattle refused to graze anywhere near that field, clustering at the far end of their pasture and bellowing uneasily through the night. Then the equipment failures escalated, not just my tractor now, but every piece of electronic equipment on the farm. Cell phones died within minutes of being fully charged. The TV emitted nothing but static, occasionally interrupted by bursts of what sounded like voices speaking in an unknown language, and the dreams God, the dreams, every night I found myself wandering through that wheat field. The stalks whisper, singing around me in voices just on the edge of comprehension. Something was always just ahead of me, always just out of sight. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the taste of metal in my mouth, and the feeling that I was on the verge of understanding something vast and terrible about a week after the crop circle appeared. I had a visitor. He introduced himself as Dr. Alan Fredman, an astrophysicist from the State University. He was different from the other investigators who'd come sniffing around, quieter, more serious. "Mr. Harper," he said, his eyes never leaving the crop circle, "have you noticed any other unusual phenomena since this appeared? Lights in the sky, perhaps electronic disturbances? The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. How did you know about that?" He turned to me, then his expression grave, because this isn't the first time this has happened. There's a pattern. "Mr. Harper, these events, they're escalating over the next few hours. Dr. Fredman told me things that shook me to my core about other crop circles, all following a similar design appearing across the country over the past few years, about increased UFO sightings in those areas, and about people who had gone missing always in the weeks following the appearance of a circle. We believe," he said in a low voice, "that these are some kind of test sites, that whatever intelligence is behind this is preparing for something bigger." I wanted to dismiss it all as crazy talk, but I couldn't. Not after what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. What do they want? I asked, my mouth dry. Dr. Fredman shook his head. "We don't know, but we think you might be in danger. Mr. Harper, these sites, they seem to have a strange effect on the people closest to them. We've documented cases of unusual behavior of people claiming to receive messages or orders from some unknown source." As he spoke, I felt a chill run down my spine. I thought of my dreams of the whispers, just on the edge of understanding what should I do. I asked, "Let us set up some monitoring equipment." He said, "And whatever you do, don't enter that field. No matter what you hear, no matter what you think you see. Promise me." I promised, but promises I would soon learn are hard to keep when reality itself seems to be unraveling around you. The next few days were a blur of activity. Dr. Friedman and his team set up cameras and sensors around the perimeter of the crop circle. They took samples of the soil and the wheat, muttering to each other in low, worried tones, and all the while, the whispers in my dreams grew louder, more insistent. I'd wake up with strange symbols etched in my mind, my fingers itching to draw them. The urge to walk into that field, to reach the center of the circle, became almost overwhelming. It all came to a head on the 7th night after the circle appeared. I was jolted awake by a sound I'd never heard before, a low thrumming vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. At once I stumbled to the window and felt my heart stop. The crop circle was glowing, pulsing with a soft blue-white light that seemed to beat in time with the thrumming sound, and there, hovering above it, were the lights I'd seen before, but this time they were descending. I don't remember deciding to go outside one moment. I was at the window the next. I was running across the yard in my pajamas, drawn toward the circle by a force I couldn't resist. Dr. Fredman's warning echoed in my head, but it seemed distant, unimportant. All that mattered was reaching the center of the circle, meeting whatever was coming down from the sky. I was at the edge of the wheat field when a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me back. It was Dr. Fredman, his face pale in the otherworldly light. "Harper, no!" he shouted over the thrumming. "If you go in there, we'll lose you." I struggled against his grip, the whispers in my head drowning out everything else. But he held firm, and slowly, painfully, I felt the compulsion begin to fade. We watched transfixed as the lights descended into the center of the crop circle. There was a flash so bright it left spots dancing in my vision, and then nothing. The lights were gone. The thrumming stopped. The crop circle lay dark and still. In the days that followed, government agents swarmed my farm. The crop circle was dug up, every grain of soil tested and retested. I was questioned for hours, as were Dr. Fredman and his team. They found nothing, no radiation, no unexplained elements, nothing to prove that anything out of the ordinary had happened. The official story became that it was an elaborate hoax, despite the lack of any evidence to support that theory. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. It's been 5 years since that night. I still farm the land, but things are different now. The wheat doesn't grow in that field anymore, no matter what we plant on quiet nights. I sometimes think I can still hear those whispers on the edge of my mind, and sometimes when I look up at the stars, I can't shake the feeling that something up there is looking back, watching, waiting. I don't know what would have happened if I'd made it to the center of that circle. I don't know what's coming or when, but I do know this. We are not alone, and the universe is stranger and more terrifying than we can imagine. So if you ever find a strange pattern carved into your fields, or see lights in the sky that move like nothing you've ever seen before, remember my story, and whatever you do, don't answer when they call, because once you do, there's no going back. The coffee cup was still warm, that's what got me, not the eerie silence, not the abandoned cars, not even the fresh tire tracks leading nowhere. It was that paper cup and the trash steam, still rising from its contents, that made my skin crawl. Someone had been here moments ago, but the rest stop was deserted. As I stood there, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. There at the edge of the woods, a figure watched, and in that moment I knew I'd stumbled into something I shouldn't have seen, something I might not escape from. My name's Alex, and I've been driving cross-country for a living for the better part of a decade. Long-haul trucking isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills and satisfies my wanderlust. I've seen my share of weird stuff on the road, inexplicable lights in the sky, ghost towns that aren't on any map, even what some might call supernatural occurrences. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I encountered that night at the Pinewood rest stop. It was a routine run St. Louis to Portland with a trailer full of electronics. I'd been pushing hard, trying to make up time after a delay at my last stop. The night was moonless. The highway, a ribbon of black stretching endlessly before me. I'd been fighting sleep for the last hour, my eyes gritty and my mind fuzzy when I saw the sign for the rest stop. I almost cried with relief. Just a quick break, I told myself. Splash some water on my face, grab a coffee, and I'd be good for another few hours. The rest stop appeared out of the darkness like an island of light. It was one of those older ones with a small building housing restrooms and vending machines and a separate area for trucks to park. As I pulled in, I noticed a few cars in the lot, but no people visible. I parked and stepped out of my rig, stretching muscles cramped from hours of sitting. The air was unnaturally still. No breeze, no sounds of insects or distant traffic, just silence that should have been my first warning. I made my way to the building, my footsteps echoing loudly on the concrete. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound jarring in the quiet. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly, casting a harsh glare over the empty space. I headed for the men's room, splashing cold water on my face and letting it run down my neck as I looked up at my reflection. Haggard and pale in the mirror, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat in the mirror. Reflected in the partially open door behind me, I caught a glimpse of movement. Just a shadow, really, but distinctly human-shaped. I whirled around, but the doorway was empty. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and nervous, even to my own ears. No response, shaking it off as a trick of my tired mind. I left the restroom and headed for the vending machines. That's when I noticed the other oddities. A jacket draped over a chair as if its owner had just stepped away, a smartphone on a table, its screen still lit up, and there in the trash can by the door, that steaming cup of coffee. My skin prickled with goosebumps. Where was everyone? I stepped back outside, scanning the parking lot. The cars I'd seen earlier were still there, some with doors hanging open. I approached the nearest one, a blue sedan. The keys were in the ignition, the engine ticking as it cooled. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing across the empty lot. Anyone here? The silence that answered was deafening. That's when I saw the tire tracks, fresh ones leading from one of the parking spots and stopping abruptly at the edge of the lot, as if the car had simply vanished. Into thin air, my heart was pounding now, adrenaline clearing the fog of exhaustion from my mind. Something was very, very wrong here. I turned, intending to run back to my truck and get the hell out of there. That's when I saw it. The figure at the edge of the woods. It was human-shaped, but somehow off, too tall, too thin. Its proportions not quite right. It stood perfectly still, half hidden behind a tree watching me. I froze, caught in its gaze like a rabbit. Before a wolf, for a long moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly it raised a hand, beckoning. Terror jolted through me like an electric shock. I ran sprinting back to my truck with a speed I didn't know I possessed. I fumbled with the keys, swearing as I dropped them, scrabbling in the gravel to retrieve them as I pulled myself up into the cab. I risked a glance back. The figure was closer now, no longer hiding behind the trees in the harsh glare of the rest stop lights. I could see it more clearly, and God, I wish I couldn't. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched too tight. Over an impossible frame, its face was smooth, featureless, except for deep-set eyes that reflected the light like a cat's, and its mouth split its face from ear to ear, filled with needle-sharp teeth. I got the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life as I slammed the truck into gear. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. More figures emerging from the woods, dozens of them all with that same impossible physiology, all moving with an unnatural fluid. Grace, I floored at the truck's tires spinning in the gravel before finding purchase. I tore out of that rest stop like all the demons of hell were on my tail, and for all I know they were. I drove for hours, pushing well past the legal limit. For consecutive time behind the wheel, I didn't stop until the sun was high in the sky, and I was 2 states away. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched when I finally worked up the courage to check my mirrors. The highway way behind me was empty, no sign of pursuit, no hint of the horror I'd left behind, but the memory of those figures, of that beckoning hand, was burned into my mind. I considered reporting what I'd seen, but who would believe me? I'd sound like a lunatic raving about monsters at a rest stop. So I kept quiet, finished my run, and tried to convince myself it had all been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But I couldn't forget, and I couldn't stop wondering about those people at the rest. Stop the ones who'd left behind their cars, their belongings, the ones who'd followed that beckoning hand into the woods. Where had they gone? What had happened to them in the weeks that followed? I did some digging. It wasn't easy. I'm no detective, and I had precious little to go on. But what I found chilled me to the bone. There were stories whispered, tales among long-haul truckers and late-night travelers. Stories of rest stops where people vanished without a trace, a figure seen at the edge of the woods, always at night, always beckoning. Some called them aliens. Others said they were interdimensional beings. A few spoke of ancient forgotten gods, awakening in our modern world. I don't know what they are. I don't know what they want. But I know they're out there waiting at the edges of lonely highways in the shadows of late-night rest stops I still drive, but never at night. If I can help it, I avoid rest stops, pushing myself to make it from one major town to the next without breaks, and I never ever stop if I see a solitary figure standing at the edge of the woods. Sometimes on long hauls when the night is dark and the road seems to go on forever, I think I see them in my mirrors, tall, thin figures keeping pace with my truck despite its speed, waiting. And sometimes I wonder if I really did escape that night, or if somehow I'm still there, trapped in some in-between place living out a life. That's not quite real, so if you're ever driving late at night and you see a rest stop appear out of the darkness, think twice before you stop. Check your gas gauge, your caffeine levels, your fatigue. Ask yourself, is it worth the risk? Because you never know what might be waiting there in the shadows. You never know who or what might be beckoning you into the woods. And once you follow, you might never find your way back. Remember my story and keep driving no matter how tired you are, because some rest stops aren't meant for rest. Some are gateways to places we were never meant to go, and once you cross that threshold, there's no coming back. The first photo showed nothing but trees. The second captured a blur of movement at the edge of the frame, but it was the third image that made my blood run cold. There, emerging from the shadows between 2 ancient pines, was a figure humanoid but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, its proportions distorted in a way that defied natural law, and it was looking. Direct lie at the camera at me, I lowered the viewfinder with shaking hands, my eyes darting to the deepening shadows around my campsite. Night was falling, and I was no longer alone in these woods. My name is Maggie Chen, and I've been a nature photographer for the better part of a decade. I've treed through rainforests, scaled mountains, and waded through swamps to get the perfect shot, but nothing in all my years of experience could have prepared me for what I encountered in the depths of the Olympic National Forest. It was supposed to be a routine assignment, a 2E solo expedition to capture the raw beauty of the old-growth forest for a conservation magazine. I'd done dozens of trips like this before, and I was looking forward to the solitude, to immersing myself in nature, without the distractions of the modern world. The first few days were idyllic. The forest was a photographer's dream, all towering evergreens draped in moth-hidden waterfalls and dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. I set up my base camp in a small clearing near a babbling stream, venturing out each day to explore and photograph it. Was on the fourth night that things started to get strange. I was reviewing the day shots on my camera when I noticed something odd in the background of one image, a shape just barely visible in the shadows between two trees. At first I dismissed it as a trick of the light or maybe a deer, but something about it nagged at me the next day. I returned to the same spot. Determined to figure out what I'd captured, I set up my camera trap, a motion-activated camera designed to capture wildlife, and left it there for the day while I explored other areas. When I returned that evening and checked the camera, my heart nearly stopped. There were dozens of images taken in rapid succession. The first few showed nothing unusual, just the forest floor and a squirrel or two, but then the figure appeared tall and impossibly thin with long spindly limbs that seemed to bend at unnatural angles. Its skin, where visible, was pale and almost translucent, stretched tight over an inhuman frame, and its face. God, its face smooth and featureless save for two large dark eyes that reflected the camera's flash like a cat's. I stared at the images, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a hoax, a trick played by some other hiker with too much time on their hands and a talent for Photoshop. But as I flipped through the sequence of photos, a chill ran down my spine. The figure was moving closer to the camera with each shot in the final image. It was reaching towards the lens, long fingers blurred with motion. I packed up my gear with shaking hands and Practice Al ran back to my campsite that night. I barely slept, starting at every snapping twig and rustle of leaves. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that there had to be a logical explanation, but deep down I knew what I'd seen was real. The next morning I woke to find my campsite in disarray. My backpack had been emptied, its contents strewn about my food cache hung high in a tree to protect it. From bear had been torn down, the rope snapped as if it were thread, and there, pressed into a patch of soft earth near my tent, was a footprint. Long and narrow with toes that looked more like claws. My camera was lying next to it with trembling fingers. I turned it on and checked the most recent images. My heart nearly stopped. There were new photos taken while I slept, photos of my tent of me. Sleeping inside, visible through the mesh window, and in each one that figure was there, getting closer and closer. I should have left. Then packed up and hiked out. Assignment be damned. But some combination of curiosity, stubbornness, and plain old stupidity made me stay. I convinced myself that if I could just get clearer photos, just to understand what this thing was, it would all make sense. So I stayed, and each night the creature came closer. I set up more camera traps around my campsite, capturing image after image of the being as it circled my tent. I barely slept, spending my nights huddled in my sleeping bag, clutching my hunting knife, and jumping at every sound. During the day, I'd venture out. Following trails of broken branches and those strange footprints, I found places where the undergrowth had been crushed, as if something large had bedded down. Once I found a tee of hair caught on a branch, coarse and gray, like no animal fur I'd ever seen. As the days passed, I began to feel like I was losing my mind. The forest, once beautiful and inviting, now seemed menacing. The trees loomed over me, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even in broad daylight, and still I stayed the need to understand, to document what I was seeing had become an obsession. It all came to a head on what should have been my last night in the forest. I was planning to hike out in the morning, my assignment completed and my sanity hanging by a thread. I'd set up my cameras for one final night of observation, hoping against hope for that one clear shot that would prove I wasn't crazy. I must have dozed off despite my fear because I woke suddenly in the pitch black of my tent. Something had changed. The ever-present sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the chirp of insects had gone silent, and there was something outside my tent. I could hear it moving softly but unmistakably circling. Sniffing, I lay there paralyzed with terror as it completed its circuit. Then, to my horror, I saw the zipper of my tent begin to move slowly, inch by agony-ing inch. The opening of my tent widened. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but my body wouldn't respond. I could only watch eyes wide in the darkness as a long pale hand with too many joints slipped through the opening. The hand paused as if sensing my fear. Then deliberately it reached towards my camera, which lay next to my sleeping bag. In that moment, survival instinct finally overcame my paralysis. I lunged for the camera, snatching it away from that terrible hand. In the same motion, I kicked out at the tent wall, tearing through the fabric and tumbling out into the night. I ran blindly, desperately clutching the camera to my chest. I crashed through underbrush, stumbled over roots branches whipping at my face behind me. I could hear it pursuing, not running, but moving with a terrible swiftness, flowing through the forest like smoke. I don't know how long I ran or how far my lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror drove me on. Finally, mercifully, I saw lights ahead. The ranger station at the trailhead, a beacon of civilization in the wilderness. I burst out of the tree line, gasping and sobbing. The startled ranger on duty took one look at my wild eyes and torn clothing and ushered me inside, locking the door behind us. The rest of that night is a blur. I remember telling my story, the ranger's skeptical looks turning to concern as he saw the raw fear in my eyes. I remember the police arriving, taking my statement, and I remember the moment when they asked to see my camera with shaking hands. I turned it on and began to scroll through the images, but where there should have been dozens of photos of that otherworldly being, there was nothing, just trees and shadows and normal forest scenes. Even the photos from that final night, the ones I was sure I'd taken of the hand reaching into my tent, were gone. In the harsh fluorescent light of the ranger station, surrounded by the trappings of civilization, my entire experience began to seem like a bad dream. Had I imagined it all, had 2 weeks of solitude in the deep woods driven me to some kind of breakdown, but then I saw it in the very last photo on the camera. Barely visible in the background was a figure, tall and thin, half hidden behind a tree, and though the image was blurry, I could swear it was smiling. I've never gone back to those woods. I've never told the full story to anyone but you. My editor got a watered-down version about being spooked by wildlife, and the photos I submitted were carefully curated to show nothing but the natural beauty of the forest. But sometimes on dark nights, when the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, I find myself thinking about what's out there in the deep woods, about the things that lurk just beyond the reach of our cameras and our understanding, and I wonder with a chill that goes bone deep if it's still out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting photographer to venture into its domain. So if you're ever in the wilderness setting up your camera, for that perfect shot of UN-touch nature, pay attention to the shadows between the trees, and if you see something moving there, something that doesn't quite fit, don't try to photograph it, just run, and don't look back, because some things in this world are not meant to be captured on film, and once they notice you noticing them, they never forget, they never stop watching, and sooner or later they come for you. The first time I saw her, I thought I was looking in a mirror. Same shoulder-length brown hair, same green eyes, even the same tiny scar above my left eyebrow from a childhood accident. But this was no reflection. It was a living, breathing woman who could have been my twin. Our eyes met across the crowded dining room, and I felt a chill run down my spine as she smiled and waved. I knew with sickening certainty that my relaxing Caribbean Crew W's had just taken a turn into uncharted waters. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and until that moment I'd been enjoying a much-needed vacation aboard the Majestic Dream, a luxury cruise liner making its way through the turquoise waters of the Caribbean. I'm a 32-year-old software engineer from Seattle, and this was my first real vacation. In years I'd been looking forward to 10 days of sun relaxation and maybe a little romance. If I was lucky, the first few days had been everything I'd hoped for. I'd lounged by the pool, indulged Ed in far too many fruity cocktails, and even struck up a flirtation with a handsome guy named Mike, who was traveling with a group of friends. It was on the fourth night at the captain's dinner that everything changed. I dressed up for the occasion wearing a new blue dress I'd bought specifically for the cruise. As I made my way into the grand dining room, I caught sight of myself in one of the large decorative mirrors and paused to adjust my hair. That's when I saw her. At first I thought it was just my reflection from a different angle, but as I turned to look directly at her, I realized with a jolt that she was a separate person, a person who looked exactly like me down to the smallest detail our eyes met, and for a moment the bustling dining room seemed to fade away. She smiled and waved as if we were old friends. I felt rooted to the spot, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of elaborate prank or a very vivid hallucination. A waiter bumped into me, breaking the spell by the time I looked back. She was gone, lost in the sea of passengers making their way to their tables throughout dinner. I couldn't focus on the conversation at my table. My eyes kept scanning the room looking for my doppelganger. I saw her once sitting at a table across the room, but when I blinked, she was gone again. "Sarah, are you okay?" Mike's voice brought me back to the present. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh. "Sorry, just a bit tired, I guess. Must be all that sun, but as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. Who was she, and why did she look exactly like me? The next morning I was determined to find her and get some answers. I spent hours wandering the ship, checking every restaurant, lounge, and deck, but there was no sign of her. It wasn't until late afternoon that I saw her again. I was heading back to my cabin to get ready for dinner when I caught a glimpse of her turning a corner at the end of the hallway. I broke into a run, but when I rounded the corner, the corridor was empty that night. I couldn't sleep every time I closed my eyes. I saw her face. My face smiling at me across the dining room around 2 a.m. I gave up on sleep and decided to take a walk to clear my head. The ship was eerily quiet. As I made my way through the deserted corridors, I found myself on one of the upper decks, leaning against the railing and staring out at the moonlit ocean. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, soft but distinct. I turned, half expecting to see my double. Instead, it was Mike, looking surprised to see me. "Sarah, what are you doing up so late?" I hesitated, then decided to take a chance. "Mike, this is going to sound crazy, but have you seen anyone on the ship who looks like me? I mean exactly like me." He frowned, looking confused. "What do you mean?" I told him everything about seeing my doppelganger at dinner, about chasing her through the ship. As I spoke, I could see the concern growing in his eyes. "Sarah," he said gently, "when I finished, I think maybe you should talk to the ship's doctor. Stress can do funny things to a person's mind, and I'm not crazy." I snapped, then immediately felt guilty at the hurt look on his face. "I'm sorry. I know what I saw, Mike. She's real." He nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe me. "Okay, look, why don't we do some investigating tomorrow? If there really is someone who looks that much like you on the ship, other people must have noticed too." "Right," I agreed. Grateful for his support, even if he thought I was losing my mind, we made plans to meet for breakfast, and I headed back to my cabin feeling slightly better that night. I dreamed of mirrors, endless corridors lined with mirrors, each one showing a slightly different version of myself. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and fruitless searching. Mike and I questioned other passengers, checked passenger lists, even bribed a junior crew member to let us look at security camera footage, but there was no sign of my mysterious double. Other passengers were starting to give me strange looks I'd overhear. Whispers as I passed, see people pointing and talking in low voices. More than once someone approached me insisting they just seen me in a completely different part of the ship. Mike stuck by me, but I could tell his patience was wearing thin. "Maybe it was just someone who looked a lot like you," he suggested one afternoon as we sat by the pool, "and now you're just seeing what you expect to see." I wanted to believe him, but deep down I knew what I'd seen, and I was becoming more and more convinced that something very strange was happening on this ship. It all came to a head on the 8th night of the cruise. I was walking back to my cabin after a late-night movie when I saw her again. She was standing at the end of the corridor watching me this time. I was determined not to let her get away. I ran towards her, calling out, "Wait, who are you? Why do you look like me?" She turned and fled, and I chased her through the twisting corridors of the ship upstairs, down hallways, through lounges and restaurants. It was like a maze, and more than once I found myself in parts of the ship I'd never seen before. Finally, I cornered her in a dead-end hallway. She stood with her back to me, shoulders heaving as if she'd been running too. "Please," I gasped out of breath. "Just tell me who you are." Slowly. She turned to face me, and as she did, I felt the world tilt sideways. Her face was mine. Yes, but it was wrong somehow. The proportions were slightly off, the eyes a little too large, the smile a little too wide as I watched in horror. Her features seemed to ripple and shift like a reflection in disturbed water. "Who am I?" she said, and her voice was a distorted version of my own. "I'm you, Sarah, or rather I'm who you could be, who you might become." She took a step towards me, and I stumbled backward, my back hitting the wall. What are you?" Her smile widened impossibly. "I'm a possibility, a potential future. This ship, it exists in a place where realities intersect, where different versions of ourselves can meet my mind." Reeled, trying to make sense of her words, but why? Why show yourself to me? She laughed, and the sound sent shivers down my spine. "To give you a choice. As of course you can go back to your life, your safe, predictable existence, or you can embrace the unknown, become something more." As she spoke, I noticed something behind her. The end of the hallway was shifting, shimmering like a heat haze, and beyond it, I caught glimpses of other places, other realities. She held out her hand. "Come with me, Sarah. See what you could become for a moment." I was tempted. The promise of adventure, of the unknown, pulled at me. But then I thought of my life back home, of my friends and family, of Mike. Probably worried sick about where I disappeared to. I shook my head. "No, this is my reality, my life, and I choose it." Her face twisted in anger, becoming less and less human. "By the second, you'll regret this," she hissed, and then before I could react, she lunged at me. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact, but it never came. Instead, I felt a rush of wind, a sensation of falling, and then nothing. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my cabin. Sunlight was streaming through the porthole, and the sounds of passengers enjoying the morning filtered in from the hallway. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream, but then I noticed something on my bedside table, a small silver pendant shaped like a key. Something I'd never seen before, but that looked strangely familiar. I picked it up, and as I did, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. For just a second, I could have sworn my reflection smiled at me with a mouth that was a little too wide. The rest of the cruise passed uneventfully. I never saw my doppelganger again, and eventually I managed to convince myself. That stress and too much sun had played tricks on my mind. Mike and I grew closer, and by the time we docked, we were making plans to see each other back in the real world. But sometimes late at night, I find myself looking at that silver key, and I wonder about roads not taken, about other versions of myself in other realities. And I can't help but think that somewhere out there on a ship sailing through the spaces between worlds, another Sarah made a very different choice voice. So if you ever find yourself on a cruise and catch a glimpse of someone who looks just like you, remember my story and think very carefully about the choices you make, because sometimes our doubles are more than just reflections. Sometimes they're glimpses of who we might become, for better or for worse. The words were whispered with such urgency, such raw fear, that I felt my blood turn to ice. "Whatever you do, don't be here at midnight." The weathered trucker who'd spoken them was already walking away, leaving me frozen in my seat, half-eaten burger growing cold on the plate in front of me. I glanced at my watch, 11:37 p.m. As I looked around the diner, taking in the tense faces and furtive glances of the other patrons, I realized with growing dread that I'd stumbled into something far more sinister than a late-night pit stop. My name's Jack, and until that moment I'd been on a routine cross-country drive from New York to Los Angeles. I'm a freelance photographer, and I'd taken on a last-minute gig that required me to transport some sensitive equipment that couldn't be trusted to shipping companies. The pay was good, and I figured the road trip would give me a chance to capture some interesting shots along the way. I'd been driving for nearly 18 hours straight, fueled by gas station coffee and the kind of determination that only comes from a looming deadline. When I saw the neon sign for Mel's Diner glowing like a beacon in the dark Nevada desert, I decided to pull over. My stomach was growling, and I figured a hot meal and a real cup of coffee would do me good. The diner looked like something straight out of a 1950s postcard. All chrome and red vinyl booths with a jukebox in the corner playing Old Rocket and our roll tunes. But as soon as I walked in, I sensed something was off. The place was surprisingly busy for the middle of the night, but the atmosphere was tense, almost electric. I slid into an empty booth and ordered a cheeseburger and coffee from a waitress whose smile seemed a little too forced as I waited for my food. I couldn't help but notice how everyone in the diner seemed on edge. Conversations were hushed and people kept glancing at the large clock above the counter when my food arrived. I tried to strike up a conversation with the waitress. Busy night. Huh. She nodded, her eyes darting to the clock. Yeah, it usually is around this time. Oh, you get a lot of late-night traffic. She hesitated, then leaned in closer. Look, honey, you seem nice, so let me give you some advice. Eat quick and get back on the road. You don't want to be here too long. Before I could ask what she meant, she was gone. Hurrying off to another table, I sat there. Burger halfway to my mouth, thoroughly confused. That's when the trucker at the counter turned to me and whispered those chilling words. Whatever you do, don't be here at midnight. As he walked away, I noticed other patrons starting to leave. They moved with an urgency that seemed at odds with the late hour, practically running to their vehicles. I flagged down my waitress again. What's going on? Why is everyone leaving? She glanced nervously at the clock. 11:45 p.m. now inside. I shouldn't tell you this, but things happen here at midnight. Bad things. Nobody knows why, but it's been going on for years. Some say this place sits on some kind of convergence, a weak spot. Between worlds, all I know is Gar, and you don't want to be here when the clock strikes 12. I laughed, though it sounded hollow even to my own ears. Come on, you can't be serious. What, is this place haunted or something? Her expression remained deadly serious. Worse now, please, for your own sake, finish up and go. I wanted to believe it was all an elaborate joke, some weird local custom to scare tourists, but the fear in her eyes, the palpable tension in the air, it felt too real to dismiss. I gulped down my car coffee and threw some bills on the table, deciding that whatever was going on, I didn't want to stick around to find out. But as I stood up to leave, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. The door to the diner was gone. Where the entrance had been was now just a solid wall covered in the same tacky wallpaper as the rest of the place. I blinked hard, convinced I must be more tired than I thought. But when I opened my eyes, the wall was still there. It's starting, someone whispered. I turned to see the other remaining patrons, about a dozen in total. Huddled together in the center of the diner, the waitress was among them, her earlier composure crumbling as she clutched a coffee pot like a weapon. What's starting? What the hell is going on here? I demanded, panic rising in my throat. An old man with a face like weathered leather spoke up. It's midnight, son, or it will be in about. He checked his wife. Watch 2 minutes? That's when they come. Who comes? What are you talking about? But before anyone could answer, the lights began to flicker. The jukebox, which had been quietly playing Great Balls of Fire, suddenly switched to a slow, discordant melody. I didn't recognize the temperature in the diner seemed to drop several degrees in a matter of seconds. Circle up, the old man shouted. Remember, don't look directly at them, and whatever you do, don't let them touch you. The group formed a tight circle, facing outward without thinking. I joined them, my back pressing against. Strangers. As we huddled together, the waitress pressed something into my hand, a salt shaker, salt and iron. She muttered only things that slow them down. I wanted to laugh, to tell them all this was insane. But the words died in my throat as I saw something moving outside the windows, shapes darker than the night itself, flowing like smoke. But with a terrible purpose to their movement, they pressed against the glass, which began to frost over, despite the desert heat. And then, as the clock struck midnight, the real horror began. The shapes outside seemed to coalesce, forming vaguely humanoid figures that were somehow more terrifying for their almost recognizable form. They oozed through the cracks around the windows, seeping into the diner like a noxious gas. Someone in our group whimpered. I felt a hand grasp mine and squeeze tight the old man's voice. Rose in a chant words in a language I didn't understand. Others joined in, their voices shaking but growing stronger as they repeated the phrases. The shadow figures circled us, their movements jerky and unnatural. I caught glimpses of limbs that were too long of faces that shifted and changed like smoke. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and something rotten. One of the creatures reached out towards our group without thinking. I flung the contents of my salt shaker at it. The thing recoiled with a hiss that sounded like radio static, its form dissipating for a moment before reforming. Time seemed to stretch and distort. I couldn't tell if we'd been surrounded for minutes or hours. My arm ached from holding it out, salt shaker at the ready. My throat was raw from chanting words I didn't understand just when I thought I couldn't take any more. When the press of bodies and the suffocating presence of the shadow creatures became too much, something changed. The old man's chanting reached a fever pitch, and suddenly the air itself seemed to ripple. The shadow figures began to retreat, their forms becoming less distinct. They flowed back out through the windows, which shattered outward in a spray of glass. A wind whipped through the diner, carrying with it the last wisps of the creatures and the lingering smell of decay. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. We stood there in stunned silence for a long moment. The only sound our ragged breathing and the crunch of broken glass underfoot. Slowly our circle broke apart. I saw tears on some faces, blank shock on others. The waitress was the first to speak. Everyone. Okay, anyone touched. There was a general murmur of assent. No one, it seemed, had been injured physically on, at least as if a spell had been broken. The diner burst into activity. People began sweeping up glass, righting overturned chairs, trying to restore some semblance of normalcy. I stood there, salt shaker still clutched in my hand, trying to process what I just experienced. The old man approached me, his eyes kind but weary first time. Huh, you did good. Son, I found my voice at last. What were those things? Why at midnight? He shook his head. Wish I could tell you've been coming here every night for 30 years trying to figure it out. All I know is they're getting stronger, and if we weren't here to hold them back. He trailed off his implication. Clear as the sun began to rise, painting the desert in shades of pink and gold. The door to the diner reappeared. People began to leave, nodding to each other with the camaraderie of soldiers who'd been through battle together. I made my way to my car on shaky legs. My mind still reeling as I was about to drive away, the waitress ran out, pressing a piece of paper into my hand. If you're ever passing through again, she said, and you want to help, this is where we'll be. I looked down at the paper. It was a schedule, listing dates and times, a roster of guardians keeping watch against the darkness. As I pulled back onto the highway, the events of the night began to feel like a dream, but the salt shaker on my passenger seat and the paper clutched in my hand were undeniable proof of what I'd experienced. I don't know if I'll ever go back to that diner. Part of me hopes I never see it again. But another part, a part I'm still coming to terms with, knows that I will, because now that I've seen what's out there, now that I know what lurks in the spaces between moments, how can I not stand against it? So if you're ever driving through the Nevada desert late at night and you see a diner glowing like a beacon in the darkness, think carefully before you stop. And if you do, keep an eye on the clock, because when midnight comes, you might find yourself facing horrors beyond imagination or standing shoulder to shoulder with strangers. The last line of defense against the encroaching dark. And whatever you do, don't be there at midnight unless, of course, you choose to be.